Good evening. Oops. Good evening and welcome to tonight's Flagler Planning and Development Board meeting. Today's date, April 11th, 2023. Gina, can we have a roll call?
Michael Boyd advised us he would be away this evening. Timothy Connor. Jack Corbett also advised us he'd be away. Heather Haywood,
Here.
Mark Langello,
Present.
and Anthony Lombardo advised us he would be away. Fernando Melendez.
Present.
All right, we do have a quorum.
Thank you. Can we all stand and join us for the pledge, please? I pledge allegiance
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next item is the approval of March 14th, 2023 regular meeting minutes.
Make a motion to approve.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Meeting is approved. Today's, oh, I'm sorry, yeah. So all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed signify by saying nay. We have an approval. As you know, our process is quasi-judicial. The audience should refrain from clapping, booing, or shouts of approval or disagreements to avoid potential legal ramification and possible overturning of a decision by the courts. A public hearing must be fair in three respects: form, substance, and appearance. Time limits will be observed. Staff, they get 10 minutes presentation. Applicants will get 15, unless time extended by consensus of board. Public comments, 3 minutes per speaker, 5 minutes if speaking on behalf of a group. Applicants' rebuttal and closing staff comments, 10 minutes each. Next item, it's a legislative item not requiring disclosure of ex parte. That's application number 3330. It's a small-scale future land use map amendment from commercial high intensity and industrial to residential high density. I'll pass it on to you, Adam.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I've got the graphics here displayed, and these are also within your packets and also the packets that were provided online for the public to view. So this is the future land use, and it's showing the area with a mix here with this has industrial for the south portion abutting the airport, and then commercial high intensity for the portion along the State Road 100 frontage, also known as Moody Boulevard. And so our zoning matches and coincides with the land use. We have industrial along the south, and then general commercial shopping center, the C2 zoning for the north portion. Flood zone here, no surprises. We have no flood hazard, no special flood hazard within this the limits of this parcel. And then the soil is also indicative of no long-term flood risk. But we do have, certainly there are some wetland areas that are here. The 12 that you see, that tan color, is a depressional soil type that's indicative of on-site wetlands. Part of what the eventual development will consist of will be some mitigation of those wetlands. And where they're not mitigated, and as you all probably know, we have adopted a policy of minimization and avoidance of impacts to wetlands. These are what's known as pre-Henderson wetlands, I believe, on these parcels adjacent to the airport. So they do fall under a separate rule versus some other rule classifications. Bottom line, there will be some permitting that will be needed through the Army Corps of Engineers ultimately for any wetland mitigation that happens on this. And then here's that aerial that shows the property. And again, if you could imagine, and you'll see a graphic here a little later, we're not talking about the entirety of the parcel for this specific land use and zoning package that you're having. This is basically the south 2/3 of the property adjoining the airport boundary. The northern portion along 100 will stay with its commercial designation and will be intended for future out parcel developments. And you'll see a graphic here in just a moment about that. What follows in the packet, and this is attached to the technical staff report, are the analysis points that we look at. And mentioned this before, but I'll say it again for the record. We have to look at the highest impact that's possible within a land use application for evaluating our impacts. And so while this one does have a proposed parcel-specific limiting policy capping the density at 255 units, we have to look instead at the maximum potential density, 10 units per acre under the future land use. We would actually top out at 283 units. And so what we're doing then, in this scenario, when we do a land use amendment, we're looking at the highest potential use under its existing designations. And for purposes of a non-residential use, that's going to be calculated as a floor area ratio. Irrespective of lands that are potentially wetlands, you are calculating that on a gross square footage based on parcel size. And then you're working backwards from that potential floor area ratio, thinking several things there, that it's not necessarily a single story floor area ratio. You can also build vertically. And so you do have some height limitations that will come in. So very much a theoretical maximum, because you remember you have zoning in play here as well. But at the 30,000 foot view for a land use application, we're taking the existing and we're comparing it to the proposed and then looking at those impacts. And so each of these then will have some specific numbers. This is intended to be a snapshot. It's intended to augment what the applicant has put together. I created these tables. I think they've been pretty useful in the past. And so the example with that bit of a narrative, here, of course, we're talking about an increase, 283 dwelling units. Presently, there would be no dwelling units that would be permitted under the existing land use. This land use is needed for a multifamily residential development. That net difference then would have an increase in population of 679 persons, remembering there's no density, no residential development that's allowed within industrial or commercial. And so then your trip generation, and this one is a little unique because we have an existing policy that's out there that pertain to this parcel and also the remaining parcels to the east that had a 17,166 daily trip cap and then 1,613 peak hour trip cap that was part of what we call that parcel-specific limiting policy. And way the analysis that's provided as part of your packet goes through the trip generation, and we agree with the methodology. This is actually well within that 1,166 daily trip count and the 1,613 peak hour. So the proposed residential development, along with the commercial out parcels that are proposed, and those will be evaluated at the time that a use is identified for those. As it's written now, that trip cap will still remain, but we're underneath that with this increase in the residential and the decrease in the potential commercial industrial floor area. And so what this is showing, while I've got an increase potentially 973 daily trips that are going up, I'm staying under that overall trip cap that had been adopted previously. So water, sewer, we've got the kind of the analysis there, and of course with the residential use, you're seeing increases in both of those. Really the takeaway here is that this analysis then and the land use itself, the R3B zoning, would ultimately require connection to the city's water and sewer system. The city utilities are required for a use of this type. Multifamily residential with the densities we're talking about, you can't have something like this on well and septic. Solid waste impacts similarly have an impact difference here that's significant. The 25 pounds that I had, maybe that's arguably something that somebody would come back and say that doesn't make sense. But I was here trying to apply that to hopefully what I would call a high bay warehouse is what I was putting it in with an office, a very limited footprint, hopefully something like a distribution center that we see like an Amazon, where what they're doing is they're using a lot of reusable plastic pallets. They're recycling their cardboard. And so what I was trying to get at there with the 25 pounds is I'm dealing with trash from an office, from a break room, maybe from a restroom facility, and not really a high generator versus the residential, which is going to be a relatively high generator because you have it tied to the persons, the population, the per capita count that we have adopted. And that, again, as you all know, all that's hauled away, disposed of in Volusia County through existing interlocals that we have with Volusia. It's not that it isn't a concern for us, but it is something that's handled effectively outside of the county. And we do have, through our interlocal agreement with Volusia, assurance from them that there's sufficient capacity at the landfill for them, for this capacity. So we don't have an issue there. Parks and Recreation is directly linked to the population. And so any increase we have on population on any of these land use items would increase respective to the increase in population, the need for recreation facilities. So that's linked to the population. And then final item that I included in that analysis is a student generator. And you can see the math there. 15 students would be estimated to be generated by this project. That's assuming 283 units. With that parcel-specific limiting policy, it would be less. So if they're coming in with the 255 as they proposed, it would be less. But at the 283, it would generate as many as 15 students. So this is what those maps would look like, and we've put this together that you'd have that industrial and in the purple, the red with the commercial high intensity at the top, and then the proposed would have that, that brown color for the residential high density that would effectively be the change. And that's approximating how that would look on this parcel. And so then that remaining portion at the top, that red that's there, would end up being your future commercial out parcels. And you'll see that again in just a few minutes. So summarizing, 28.32 acres total. This request is the companion to the rezoning application, the next application on the agenda. This amendment does include a parcel-specific limiting policy that you're going to see on the next slide. Amendment has the effect of replacing the existing non-residential land uses with multifamily residential land use, permitting up to 10 units per acre. The analysis is based on that worst case, but they're not intending to develop at that. They're going to develop at 255. By the way, the 255 is actually the maximum that's allowed within the R3B zoning. So if they wanted to do something different, they wanted to go up to that 10 units per acre, they'd have to come in potentially as a PUD, and that's not happening here. Overall impact is less with the amendment and the rezoning. The land use amendment prerequisite for the rezoning, so that you have to have the land use in order for the rezoning to happen. If this land use ultimately is not approved by the Board of County Commissioners, the rezoning becomes moot because we can't have the one without the other. This is that first step. The rezoning has to then follow this. And ultimately, the rezoning would be contingent upon the land use coming into effect. Here's that parcel-specific limiting policy that I mentioned. It's also included in the technical staff report and also within the draft ordinance attached to this item. And so you can see the language that's there. Probably the more critical part is that last part. Density on the residential acreage shall not exceed 255 units. Remembering that this is a parcel-specific limiting policy that basically encompasses all of the Flagler Pines and Flagler Airport industrial ownership. So it's the parcel to the east, all the way over to the racetrack development, the racetrack gas station, to the west, all the way over to Airport Commons, abutting the airport property itself, and to the south to the airport. So we're not just talking about a single parcel here. We're amending that parcel-specific limiting policy that applies to that collectively. And so residential portion limited to 255. Development shall be multifamily, designed to ensure that safety standards pertaining to height, noise, and safe navigation have been followed. No structure containing residential multifamily dwelling units should be constructed less than 100 feet from the boundary line with the Flagler Executive Airport. Natural and planted landscape buffers shall be utilized to ensure that there are no conflicts between multifamily residential uses and surrounding high-intensity commercial and industrial uses. You've heard from me before, I'm not a fan of this kind of stuff, putting in a parcel-specific limiting policy in your comp plan. But absent a PUD zoning, which we seem to rely on because it creates a feeling of compatibility, whether it's actual or just a feeling. But this is the method to do this. And so what you can do, and what we are doing here, and what the applicant's intending to do here, is to create through this language, a next step that's required through the R3B zoning, through successive platting, if that's what's involved. We don't anticipate platting at this point. We anticipate a final site plan to come in for this residential portion, and that we will then judge as staff those next steps against this policy. So if this policy ultimately is recommended by the Planning Board, approved by the Board of County Commissioners, these are the conditions that will apply to that next step, those next steps that happen in this development. Reason why I don't like this is because this is really land development code items. This is really the specifics of how you do the development. You don't put this into your comp plan, but sometimes you need to. And so that's where the applicant has proposed to put this. We're comfortable as staff with having this in here if it accomplishes the goal of demonstrating a standard that everyone can rely on for the next things to come. With that, certainly could talk more, but I'll leave my presentation to the options that are available to the Planning Board to recommend to the Board of County Commissioners approval. And that would be the land use change from commercial high-intensity industrial to residential high-density, finding the amendment is consistent with the comprehensive plan. Likewise, the Planning Board could recommend denial, and that would be a finding that the amendment is not consistent, or the Planning Board could recommend or could take an action for continuance of this meeting to a time and date certain. We would still have to do some notice likely, but what that would be is for some specific purpose, typically either from the applicant or from staff, to be able to come back with more information. With that, I'm going to say the same thing I usually say. I'm submitted the report for the record purposes. Applicant has a presentation, and I think probably best, we talked about it before the meeting, they intend for it to be encompassing of both the land use and the zoning. I've got some things specific in zoning that are going to be talking more about compatibility as it relates to noise, and which probably relates to any public comments that you're going to hear, because what we have is the airport that's nearby. And so that's kind of the underlying theme that you'll probably see through much of this. But I'd like to, if the board and the chair are willing to have that presentation by the applicant, that'll be encompassing of both the land use application 3330 and 3331, the rezoning. I will do a separate presentation for the rezoning for that specific item if and when we get to that. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Adam. Does anyone in the board has, before we go to the applicant, questions for staff? All right, at this time, I'd like to invite the applicant to present.
Jay, I'm sorry, I don't have the clicker, so you can just say next slide. I didn't.
Good evening, Jay Livingston here with Livingston and Sword. I'm the authorized applicant or authorized agent for Flagler Pines property, which is the current property owner. As Adam said, we're going to do a joint presentation for both applications, save some time. As he also mentioned, the limiting policy that we'll get to is specifically tied to the zoning and the max density allowed there. So they are very, like all flume and rezonings that happen at the same time, they're very combined and oh, awesome, which button do I push? This one? But the presentation will be available. If you have any questions, we need to come back to this presentation after the rezoning presentation by Adam, we can do that. So this is just an overview of the property. This is the current future land use. As you can see, there's a kind of an angular red that kind of bleeds to the south where there's commercial high intensity, and then it's all industrial. In the past, before this change was made, which was not that long ago, the industrial areas were agriculture. I don't know if you recall on the map. And if you pull up the future land use map that's online, it still shows that green blotch that was where the industrial used to be agriculture. That was changed to industrial, and a large portion of it will remain industrial, but we are proposing to change it to residential high density. I do want to point out a couple things relevant to Mr. Mengle's presentation. This is industrial land use. From a future land use map perspective, we're dealing with industrial land use and the policies that apply to that land use designation. Flagler County's code is interesting. As you probably are aware, there's, you have your future land use, and then you have zoning districts that are compatible with those future land use districts. In Flagler County, the only zoning district that's compatible with the industrial land use is the industrial zoning. But and we'll get into this in a little bit, it's a little bit confusing because industrial as a zoning district is a lot broader than just industrial uses in Flagler County. So I just want to point that out because the comparison tables that were used in staff presentation discussed warehouses and other types of industrial uses that are really not the highest and best use that could be built there. A good example of the highest and best use that could be built in the industrial would be the project that's being built just to the east, which is the BJ's Wholesale Club. That is not an industrial use, obviously, it's a high-intensity commercial use. It's on the purple shape there that's designated industrial, and that's just a feature of the Flagler County Code that high-intensity commercial uses are also permitted uses within that. So the types of high-intensity commercial uses, which are more likely to be built here than any type of industrial use, will have a much greater impact than an Amazon warehouse, which has a lot of employee traffic, but not necessarily a lot of commercial type traffic generation. So the proposed policy, when we initially submitted, we ran into some concerns from staff about some comp plan consistency issues. And so in working through it, addressing some of the problems that were raised by the potential problems that were raised by the airport director, we tried to find a solution to that. And so we're actually not proposing a limiting policy. We're proposing an amendment to an existing limiting policy. So this policy, A1.1.10.7, already is in your future land use element of your comprehensive plan. And as written, and that's what the strike-throughs and underlines are for. The underlines are the additions, the strike-throughs are the removals. So we've updated the tax parcel IDs, and we've changed the acreages of what can be industrial, what can be commercial high intensity, and then added a policy to the policy that controls development to ensure compatibility with the airport use. So we're not, I understand Adam's dislike for limiting policies. Most jurisdictions do. In this case, we basically took a policy that already existed and just modified it to ensure that we would have a quality development and to ensure that the county would have adequate controls to avoid any conflicts with the airport. So, since we're combining this, this map is actually a really good visual of what it will look like if it's approved and developed, as well as what we're changing. So everything that is the red or the pink is the existing commercial. And what we're proposing to do, and then everything behind that is the existing industrial. So that little angled line is where the current future land use and zoning line exists. We're proposing to change a little bit of the commercial, just that section between that angled line and those frontage parcels to residential, and then everything to the south to residential, maintaining that strip of commercial frontage, which is the ideal location for those types of commercial uses. So the existing zoning is the colors that you see, and then the lines that you see drawn there at an angle, that's actually the proposed residential zoning. The traffic report that we submitted with the application was based upon a comparable use, actually not quite a BJ's, more of a retail shopping center, but a comparable use to what's next door and what would likely be developed there because of the development pattern. You have Airport Commons all the way to the west. You have Airport Commons Phase 2, which is currently under construction. Most likely, you would have some similar type of big box commercial development that would be consistent with the BJ's use. And as you can see, without the limiting policy that currently exists, you would be dumping out a substantial amount of traffic onto 100, which currently, and I think even in the future with future improvements, it really can't handle. Even with the limiting policy, we're talking about a substantial increase in traffic if we make that whole area commercial. So the proposed development is to mix it up. Is to create a nice mixed-use project with some commercial frontage, which is going to maintain commercial uses, the job generation that commercial uses bring, while taking the bulk of the land, the big 28-acre chunk, and turning that into a multifamily use, which will substantially reduce that traffic impact, as well as hopefully create some internal capture with the commercial uses that are around there to avoid trips out on the road for people that need to go to whatever's going to be on the frontage parcels, the BJ's next door. So this is our comparison of the two, which is based specifically really on the zoning analysis, although you can see we did utilize a little bit of a higher residential count, which is 280 dwelling units in the original study, because we were still at the time working with a variety of acreages and how to divide it. So we're a little closer to the highest and best use that Mr. Mangle used in his analysis, and then we have a substantially higher intensity use for the commercial use, which we believe is a more likely development for that parcel if it's stated under its current zoning. And that's because the actual industrial zoning district in the land development code, just so you understand, it's not an industrial zoning district in the true sense of the word, where it's purely for industrial uses. The permitted uses in industrial zoning district are any industrial, office, commercial, or related use or structure. So essentially, the industrial zoning district in the Flagler County is everything but residential is permitted at a high intensity. With some, most of that portion of the code is really controls for industrial uses, if that actually is what's built. But it allows anything that's any non-residential use. So the big issue that came up when we were discussing it was concerns about airport compatibility. We initially submitted last year, and after our first meeting with the technical review committee, we went back and we did our homework to make sure that we did not have any compatibility issues, because those concerns were raised by the airport director primarily, and we wanted to make sure that we weren't going to propose a project that was going to create airport conflicts, because it's not going to do any good for the developer to build an apartment building that nobody wants to live in because it has a conflict with the airport. So we went back and I did our homework, and I think you'll be pleased with the results. I'm not going to do the entire part of this presentation, but I just want to do a little introduction. So I threw this back graphic just to kind of give you a better idea as to where the project is if you pull back a little further. So you can see the airport, you can see the project site just to the north. And this actually is a graphic from the county's own pamphlet on the voluntary noise mitigation that they encourage pilots that use the airport to follow in order to avoid impacts. The reason I put it on there is it's a really good example to show you kind of the flight patterns and where the real impacts as far as noise is concerned lie. And as you can see, you're really dealing with the major noise impacts are areas that are at the end and further out, directly straight out from the runways, as opposed to adjacent to the airport like our project is. And the residential areas that are over there are obviously impacted by it. And as you can see, I think a real telling example as to how airport operations can affect residential areas, the little note there that says no turns prior to 700 feet and turns shall be made over a wooded area, because that's really where the noise impact's occurring, not directly adjacent to the runway on the ground, as the next slides will show. So what we did was the FAA has a process where you can get what's called a Part 150 sound study, and that determines your actual sound impacts. And if you do one of those studies, you get a noise contour map that shows you where the decibel levels are going to be generated and where you're going to be too close to the airport to be compatible for certain types of uses, including residential. Flagler Airport, like most airports in the state, do not have a Part 150 sound study, and so we engaged a sound engineer to perform a sound analysis to determine if we were going to be within the 65 decibel range, which is considered to be incompatible, or outside of that 65 decibel range where we would be considered a compatible use. And with that, I will turn it over to our sound engineer.
Good evening. My name is Rob Lilkendy. I'm with RML Acoustics. I did the sound study for the client. For noise impacts, as Jay mentioned, the FAA uses what's called a yearly day-night average sound level. So this is a measure of all the sounds over the course of 24 hours, averaged over that 24-hour period, and there's a 10 dB penalty applied to all sounds that occur between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. So with the idea that you'll be more sensitive to sounds that occur at night, so it elevates the average number over the course of the day. This is what the FAA uses to determine compatibility. It accounts for the noise levels of all the individual airplane events, how many there are, and the time of day that they occur. And per Part 150, a residential development is considered compatible if it's called the DNL, the day-night level, is below 65 dB. So for the study, as you can see on the slide here, we placed a noise monitor at locations on the southwest corner of the site and the southeast corner of the site, and we ran them continuously for 7 days to measure the DNL each day from the, of course, it's not measuring just the planes, it's measuring all the sounds in the environment, including, insect noise and traffic on State Road 100. And so they were also set to record the sound. So it's not just measuring the sound level, but it will record sounds that exceeded predetermined level, which we determined at the time to be 57 dBA for more than 4 seconds. So that allows you to identify what those sources are. You don't want to set that level too low because then you're recording everything. And so you get, 100, 200, 300 recordings in a day of each of the flights, and you can listen to verify that it's actually planes that are flying or helicopters. So on this next slide, no, that was too fast. Why is it jumping? Okay. You can see the two locations, southwest, southeast, their distances from the current runway, from the center of the runway, and from State Road 100 to the north. And here is a table that summarizes all of the day-night levels measured for each of the 7 days from November 27th to December 3rd. In the first set of columns, you see the DNL from all noise sources. When you average over the course of the week, it was 57 dB and 56 dB, which is less than the 65 limit. But that includes all noise sources. When you extract out just what the plane noise sources were contributing, those averages in the next set of columns was 49 and 47 dBA, which is 15, 16 or so below the 65 dB limit. So they're actually only adding about 0.4 to 0.9 dB to the cumulative sounds of the environment for the course of the day. And you might think, how can that be? Well, there are, the planes aren't constant. They're occasional, and then at night there's basically no planes. And so, but you do have insect noise. So after 10 p.m., I think you see in the far two right columns, the numbers in parentheses are the number of planes that occurred between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. So each day there was like 1 or 2 planes that occurred, and those usually occurred between 10 p.m. and midnight or 6 a.m. and 7 a.m. And so the other sounds that occur at night, which is mostly insect noise, those do get a 10 dB penalty. So that's why the sound levels were up in the 50s from those noise sources. So basically, based on this a week's worth of measurements, and here you can see on the far right, there's some days in which we had up to 300 or more flights in a day, or events, I should say, of the planes. So you really not going to get that much more, and even if you did, it wouldn't add that much more to the sound level. You have to double the number just to add 3 dB to the sound level, and with the sounds being 15 or more below the limit, there's a lot of headroom there, to have more, plane-related events occur. So based on our week's worth of study of the sound levels, it's, would be compatible using the FAA criterion of 65 dB. Oh, and one last thing is, so for the proposed future runway, the distance between the nearest residential structures increased from about 1,120, 1,440 feet up to now would be closer to, this thing jumps around, 1,643 feet to the nearest structure. So it's even a little farther from the future runway.
And before we wrap up for your questions, I'm going to have Steve Grigg. He's a representative with the developer who would be developing the apartments to discuss their comfort level with the location. So I'm going to put a slightly more detailed version of the site plan up and let Mr. Grigg take over.
Thank you. Commission,
Can you, for the record, state your name loudly, clear, and
My name is Stephen Gregg. I'm president of Republic Properties Corporation. I'm a resident of St. Johns County and a licensed architect in the state of Florida. The plan that you see in front of you gives you a feel for the development. The setbacks of the buildings on the south side of the site are about 115 feet from the property line. They're about 100 feet from the property line on the west. You can see on the right the boulevard that we're developing between ourselves and that services BJ's and that commercial development. Behind the commercial parcels that are adjoining East Moody Boulevard, Route 100, there's a service drive that essentially feeds those parcels. Our development is centered around water features. We have 3-story, 40 or 30-unit buildings. You can see they're making 240 units. The basic principles that we developed, there's a preserved wetlands that adjoins the BJ's parcel. So as you come in, you essentially pass a water feature focused on another water feature. There's a community center and a pool, and the units are spread around them. From our experience, we found that freeway noise is really a much bigger issue than roadway noise, than airport problems that we have. We have a lot of experience in DC with being right next to the tidal basin and the Potomac River, where all of the planes and helicopters actually fly down about the same level as the building, and the freeways are a much bigger issue. We think the uses are compatible and hope you'll approve the project. Thank you.
thank you.
And that's all we have, other than to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Does the board members have any questions for the applicant? Go right now.
I do. I'm going to try to address you, Jay, and then I might need your sound guy. Your developer just said they're 3-story buildings. What is the height limitation of the buildings? Like, what is the height of the third floor?
13-foot floor-to-floor heights, and they have a hip roof on top of them.
So let's forget the roof part. You got
Sorry, if you
13
could slide
foot.
over to your right, so your comments are captured on the microphone, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
It's all right.
You're probably going to elevate the ground several feet. So your 13 feet per floor level will be over 40 feet high for your third floor, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
for the roof.
No, the roof is going to be higher than 40 feet. 13 feet will get you somewhere in that third floor area. 40 feet will be somewhere, 13 times 3 would be 39 feet, right?
To the top of.
And then you're going to be elevating that ground. You're not building on existing table. You're going to go up 3-4 feet by the time you get done with your first
Yes,
floor.
actually, you're exactly correct.
So you're going to be somewhere in the 40-foot, that third floor is going to be hitting somewhere in that 40-foot will be somewhere in that third floor range.
It would be lower than the trees that are adjacent to the property.
The sound study, I have a couple questions for your sound study guy. So what was the height of the microphones that you put the microphones at?
About 6.5 feet.
Okay, and they were nestled in that wooded area. I know a little bit about sound. I'm sure you know a lot more than me. But I do know that sound on an unobscured area that's straight, eye of shot, is going to be a lot different than sound nestled down in the trees, correct? So if you have if it was me talking to someone in the back of the room right here, and if I put stuff in between them, it would not be as the dBs would be reduced between that, correct?
Yeah, well, it depends on what you put between it, yes, the extent to
Okay,
which it
but
would be
trees have
reduced.
canopy, which absorbs sound, and you're 6 feet high, and what are the height of those trees there? Anyone have an idea? 30, 40 feet high?
I'd probably
That's
put-
what I think
I'd
they are.
probably say 40.
Those are mostly pines and some cypress in there? Yeah.
Sir.
Okay. I have, so on the study part of it, I have a problem with the methodology. for a few reasons. First of all, like I said, you have a microphone nestled down 6 feet high, and you have trees that are 30, 40 feet high with canopy, and you're reading an environment that is not the environment that it would be. The environment would be without trees, and some other objects like the tree. You're going to have a cleared up area where the parking lot is and whatever. So you're going to have a different environment. So I think your DBs would change that to some degree. And what were the dates that you did the study on again?
It was Sunday through Monday. It was a full
No,
week.
the dates.
It was November 27th through December 3rd.
Okay. So that was after Thanksgiving. We have other holidays here. We have an awful lot of events. I'm going to ask, I'm sure, I see the airport director back there, so I'm sure it'll come up. But we have other holidays that we have a lot more events that people fly in and use the airport more frequently. So that 1 week study may or may not be a very heavily trafficked time. So there could be times of the year that there could be a lot more sound than what you're recording. Would you agree?
Well, I can address both your,
So I mean, like
Questions at some
for
point,
instance,
if you'd like
I'm not an expert on when people fly in the airport, but I do know that we have some weeks here, like, spring break and Biketoberfest and Bike Week and just different events. And I don't know when the airport's more busy, but if your dates coincided with more heavily peak times when that airport is used.
well, so if you look at the table that's up on the screen right now, so one of the days there was 337 flights that we measured, so that's 22 an hour. So you're talking about one every 3 minutes. I don't know if you
Right.
have much more traffic than that.
Well,
but
there's
if you
flight
double
school,
that,
there's flight schools there.
I think that might have been what that
Which
was.
use prop planes, and then there's jets, and the jets are significantly louder than a prop plane. So the prop planes take off and land, and they're, you can get one plane on your study showing up 30 times because he's taking off and landing and taking off and landing. So I just don't know if the the representation of that week is an average, high or low, and how that would affect the sound study. So I'm just not 100% convinced that study is the end-all, be-all of what the effect could be. So that's what, and I just giving you an opportunity, that's why I'm asking you to, help me out with that.
Yeah, well, and let me address your first concern. So if you go back to this slide here, one time, there we go. So if you see where we took the measurements, all the property to the south of that is not the client's property, right? That's Flagler Airport property. So those trees aren't going anywhere. So we're measuring pretty much the same environment.
Go to the
that
study, go to
you
the
would
slide
have.
that showed the property line, where those things were. You had one that had the property line.
Right.
So you're right on
So-
the edge of the property, but the
Right.
structures were further away
Right.
by 100 or more feet.
But I can tell you that makes no difference acoustically. So you're talking about 500 to
so-
1,000 feet of woods,
So somebody on
and then
the
a few feet of non-woods does not change the level
100
there.
feet of non-woods and you're 40 feet in the air with your third floor
Right.
would be the same as you nestled down in that forest of trees.
Again, so you have all that distance of trees to start with. Then you have a small distance beyond that where you actually have the face of the building. So the way sound propagation outdoors works is it's 6 dB per doubling of distance. So if you've already gone 1,100 feet or 1,200 feet, that extra 100 feet is less than a decibel of difference between what you measure right at the property line and then right at the face of the building. Secondly, when you're talking about measuring down low or up high, the tree canopy there is above 40 feet. So whether you're on grade or up high, you're still behind all those trees. You're still shielded by the, quote, barrier of 1,000 feet of trees. So that doesn't change that environment significantly. We're talking about less than a dB. I just have been measuring sounds at the Hilton Head Airport. I have monitors out there for 6 months measuring. We have the sound monitors up on scaffolding 30 feet in the air at the top of the building because that's what the residents wanted. And we wanted to keep them away from where people would be. But I did a study to make sure that the difference between what's happening at the top of the scaffolding and what's happening on grade is not significant enough that we want to make that change. it was less than a quarter of a dB average of what I was measuring on grade and what I was
Okay,
measuring
but
30
but
feet in the
just
air.
so we're on the same page, though, I don't know that.
was
condi-
for-
But that condition, we're talking about microphones that are 6 feet high inside of a canopy, nestled down in a canopy. The condition that you may or may not be monitoring there is not probably the same thing. You weren't down below a canopy, and then you put them up above a canopy. And you're talking about removing the trees now and having the mic, because where you put that mic is the closest to the property line, but not where the effect would be. So if you then raise the building up 100 feet away from the trees, and now you're 40 feet high, you now have an unobscured path of travel for sound to hit that third floor versus down in that tree canopy where there's trees and canopies all the way around you. So the sound would have to be vibrating through the canopy of leaves to get down to your microphone versus unobstructed to the building. That's why I just have a problem with, it's just the two different conditions. That's what I'm just trying to understand, you're telling me you did one at Hilton Head, but you raised it and lowered it. I don't know if that was in a canopy versus out of a canopy with obstacles around it versus not around it, and may not be the same condition. That's what I'm trying to understand.
So the one at Hilton Head is actually a worse condition because the planes are flying overhead. These planes are off at a low level. Basically, the sound's coming through the trees, right? And whether your microphone is at 7 feet through the trees or at 30 feet through the trees, it's still through the trees, right? Because the canopy is taller than the highest.
Well, the only thing we've heard is the
Building, yeah.
canopy is 30 or 40 feet high is what we just heard from our.
Well, I think what we
planning
heard
director.
was the building was 30, 40 feet high and it'd be below the canopy of the trees.
Well, but Adam said, Adam, what do you think that canopy is at?
I'd probably put the trees at between 30 and 40.
That's what I believe too.
I was out there, they're definitely 40 feet tall. I mean, it's a pretty heavily
They were saying
wooded
that the
area out there.
roof of it is below the tree line.
Right.
And so what he was saying in Hilton Head is that difference, whether it be the same circumstances as this or not, is the difference in that height.
I think they're
was
measuring something completely
less
different
than a
at Hilton
quarter.
Head, though. So that's why I just don't want to I don't want to get in the weeds with that part of it. I'm
Well,
just trying to
I think
understand
it's
the methodology,
necessary
so.
to get in the weeds because of the questions that you've asked. So first of all, I want to make sure it's clear because from your comments, it doesn't seem like it is. Everything south of that boundary line is staying natural. It's a wetland.
Yeah,
So that tree canopy is not going anywhere. So where it's currently nestled, regardless of what's built to the north, the conditions are going to be relatively the same, if not exactly the same as you're seeing here. Now, we provided some slides that weren't part of the main presentation, but this is what happens when you do an actual 150 sound study of an airport. So this is the Fort Lauderdale Executive Airport, which is the closest airport. There's only like 7 or 8 airports in the state that have had a Part 150 sound study performed because they're usually not necessary. But this is an actual part of an FAA-approved Part 150 sound study. Much more in terms of what's the time frame for those? It's not 7 days, right?
No, it's yearly, it's calculated using computer models. They don't actually go out and measure. They have a computer model where they input the planes and the heights and all that, and they come up with these numbers.
So this is how the FAA would determine compatibility areas for an airport. And the executive airport, which is comparable to what we have here, these are the distances that you have
To the 65.
to the 65 line. So that outside line is the 65 decibel line. If you put our project in terms of distance, that's what you're looking at. So, and you can see that, there's no tree canopy, wetlands, or anything around. You have it almost fully developed around here. The reason the sound study was done at this airport because of the amount of problems they've had. But as you can notice, when you get to the side of the runway, you see how that distance is much shorter than at the ends of the runway, which is where the real sound problems occur. Not a comparable example because it's a much different airport, but it's really helpful to understand the types of distances we're talking about where sound becomes not an issue of compatibility as determined by the FAA, is the Southwest International Airport, which is in Fort Myers, in Lee County. This airport is an international airport. It gets full-size jets that come into it, as opposed to an executive-type airport like we have here, where you have some jet traffic, but not of the same level, not of the same size. And your 65 decibel line is still 1,408 feet based upon that. So I understand the question about the methodology because I'm not a sound engineer either, and so it can get very confusing. But But the sound, particularly in a location like our project, which this is a measurement, it's a little catty-cornered, but as you can see, to the buildings themselves, we're still outside of that dB range. And that's what we did. You know, if you go back to this original sound study slide, you can see it's a very different site plan. Oh. Very different site plan. This is, oh my God. You gotta wait.
Yeah.
All right. So this is a very different site plan. This is what we started with when we initially submitted to the sound study after the first technical review committee, and you can see we have buildings that are much closer. And then in developing the limiting policy amendment and figuring out a way to ensure there was adequate buffering, we then came up with the site plan that you saw, which pushes everything, you know, boundaried by the parking. There's going to be perimeter landscaping that's actually written into the policy to ensure that vegetation is replaced where it's removed. You're not losing the tree canopy to the south, which is predominantly a wetland, and then obviously increasing the distance from where the buildings would be to minimize those sound impacts. And that's I put this one up because it kind of shows you how the buildings are going to be oriented to the boundary line of the property. So this is the, you know, airport expansion. Eventually, the airport will hopefully be improved, and this will be the relocated runway. It's being pushed even further away. But this kind of gives you a good viewpoint as to how much distance there is, how much undisturbed vegetation and trees that are going to be there in perpetuity, hopefully, because there's no development in that wetland area that will, as far as we can tell, not really change the existing conditions. So I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, and I'd just like to mention, so even though there are differences between, of course, measuring with and without that bit of parking lot there, these differences are very small acoustically. When you're that far from a source, the changes are very small. If you're right up next to it and you move from, if you're 50 feet away from a noise source, you move another 50 feet, big drop. Very noticeable drop. But if you're already 1,000 feet away and you move another 50 feet, you wouldn't notice it. So yes, they're not identical because obviously the trees are there. But in terms of height changes and a little bit of depth changes, you're in the 1 or 2 dB range tops. And if you look at the data that we had, the planes were below 50. And so you've got 15 dB of headroom there. So your question about the types of planes that occurred when the measurements were made is more of a question that maybe we don't have as clear of an answer because we're not there looking at every single plane that goes by. But we did measure several days that had 300 and something planes, so you'd like to think you had a pretty good mix of planes during those days. But as far as like these other things from a pure sound propagation standpoint, the differences really aren't significant in terms of, it's not like we were at 64 dB and that 1 dB will put you over the edge. It's pretty far below that. Were there any other questions?
No.
Does any more questions? Young lady, you have any more questions? No? Oh, I just want to add a little bit to the sound study. I'm a data guy. I'm a study guy. And I believe in studies. But when it comes to sound, the study of sound, there's a lot of variations. There's variation in winds. There's other noise factors. And like you said, different planes, different engines. So, I have the same concerns you have. And I'm not taking away nothing from the study. But there's something that we have to, I think, look into deeper into that noise factor because it happens when the people buy the property and move in. That's when you're going to see the problem. Not now. It's not going to happen now. So that's my only concern. And of course, the height that we weren't exactly sure where it was going to be 40, 35, could be more than 40. So that's my only questions. Do we have any questions for staff? Anybody else? All right, so thank you.
I just wanted to point out one other thing, because obviously when you have this kinds of sound studies or studies in general, there's lots of data in them, but I think one of the critical things that was mentioned at the very beginning of the presentation on sound is that when you're talking about separating the sound sources, because we have, crickets and other bugs that can be pretty noisy. Somebody mentioned Bike Week as a time when the airport might get busier, but I would, having been in the county for a very long time, I would think that it's pretty hard to argue that bikes going down at 100 are not going to be louder than planes coming in occasionally at the airport. And actually I can't say that anything on here was a bike, although I'm sure one went by during the 7 days that it was there, being Flagler County. You can see that the non-plane sources that were in that area, and so you have to imagine what those would be if they're non-planes. There's some airport operations going on, but most of the sound in those locations where the meters were are going to be probably coming from the road. I think there was some construction activity. Did you? Okay, so the insects was some road noise, and that's actually mentioned in the narrative in the report, exceed the plane-related events decibels. So we're, and just to get into context of the relative sounds that are all happening where we are, the sound pollution, as they call it, that we have to live with. And as Mr. Griggs said, in his experience with these types of developments, it's actually roads, interstates, it's traffic, it's road noise that's more of a problem with their projects than even the project in DC he mentioned, where you have low-lying planes, low-lying helicopters going by. So we completely understand the concerns about sound. We wouldn't have waited 3 months from first TRC to second TRC to get the sound study done. And the airport director himself in TRC and in his own comments has noted that we're dealing with what's called a perceived sound problem, not an actual sound problem, but a perceived sound problem based upon the complaints that he's received. But now that we've kind of learned a little bit more about sound in airports, as you can see, which is why I put this map up, the really impacted areas, when you're talking about end of runways, overflight areas, is these residential subdivisions that are to the east and the west, as the runways are oriented, which is, even with the relocated runway, larger planes in the future, is not going to change the actual flight patterns. And where we are, as you saw the FAA studies, where it's wide at the ends and narrow in the middle, we're in the middle, where the sound has a much less of an impact. So I just want to make sure that's clear, because it's really those overflights. And as I said, told the technical review committee the day of our last meeting, as I was leaving the house, Flagler Beach, on my way to the meeting at 9 a.m., I thought it was kind of ironic that I was confronted with an airplane over my head and how loud it was. We're talking Flagler Beach now, so definitely high, not approaching the airport. And that noise was very, very loud. When I first started the firm, our office was actually at the airport next to the chamber, in the old chamber building. And I honestly, except when the Life Flight helicopter took off, you never knew that there was an airport behind us in the office. It was the helicopter taking off because it was right behind us practically. Was the only time we ever heard anything airport related when the office was there we were there for 4.5, 5 years. So just wanted to point that out.
Thank you. At this time, you have a question?
About the sound thing,
Okay, go
but
ahead.
for staff. When we're talking about the increase for the educational facilities, how do we come up with only 15 students out of 283? And we're talking multifamily, so.
Yeah, the school
me,
board
it would
didn't
be
give you
like-
that number, did they?
To me, it'd be, with multifamily, we're probably thinking 2 to 3 kids a apartment.
Yeah, I used the generator, that's what I had at the bottom of the table. If you've got it there, I was going to try to go to that slide, but let me see if I can get there.
Educational facilities demand is based on the actual FTE counts applied by the school district at grade level based on housing type.
So multifamily has as I recall, I think it's a lower generator, but don't quote me, the math's there. And
.027 for
so,
elementary.
and so that's the accepted generation rate that we all together have. And so it could be higher, could be lower. No mention of age restriction here. But I think the map's good. I'll check it again, but that should be,
I was
that should be it.
just a question.
And if I may, just to help that, and I didn't bring the studies with me because I didn't know that was going to come up, but, so yeah, the school board they did an impact fee study and to determine, obviously, what their student station needs were going to be, to determine how much money they needed to collect, which determines the impact fee, but also what their anticipated student generation is going to be. So they have a student generation factor that you apply for you take your population, you apply it to that. Single family generates more students than certain types of multifamily, all the way up to apartment types, which is the lowest generator, I believe, except I think mobile homes might be the lowest generator. Is that correct? But one of the interesting things was that when they did this study, the original impact fee study that was done in 2006 and the impact fee study that they did 2 years ago now, I guess it's been, the student generation rates actually significantly declined. So the original assumptions in the original impact fee ordinance, they were wrong. And that was based upon actual student generation data in the school district from the first impact fee study when student impact fees became something in Florida, as a part of Florida law, an authorized impact fee, to the present with our new impact fee ordinance that just went into effect. They actually determined that the student generation was less. So those numbers, although still based upon assumptions and
Right.
were based on a lot of hard Flagler County data from first impact fee study to second impact fee study to come up with that generation rate.
Right, and where this is located, they're going to be zoned for rimfire only? That's just the one?
It should be right. I think that's what our school,
Or is it old?
I don't think
It's really hard to say what they'll be zoned for by the time this
Yeah,
project
that's
comes
true,
out of the
too.
ground because
Well,
of,
the boundary lines are already set.
Right, but those can be modified and some may have to be modified. If the project is approved before it can be built, they would determine if there was a shortfall in the school student stations at the local schools.
Okay,
And then there would be, every single unit has to pay an impact fee. But in addition to that, if there's a shortfall, they have to front the money for the prop share to pay for the student station shortfall. The interesting thing about multifamily projects is that even though the school district still requires us to go through the prop share process, when I build a house, I pay my impact fee for that one house at the time of the building permit. So I might get a 300-lot subdivision approved, but the school board, with the exception of that prop share payment that it gets at the time of final plat, which is a portion of the impact fee, they have to wait until every single house is built before they get their money. And that is a nightmare for them as far as planning, because schools are very expensive to build. A multifamily is interesting because even though the school board still requires you to go through the reservation and prop share process, when you pull that building permit to build your multifamily buildings, your development, you pay 100% of your impact fees at that time. So they fund themselves a lot more efficiently than single-family housing does from a student station perspective. That's the process that you have to go through. The prop share payment is due before you get whatever final approval will allow you to start generating units. So if it's a plat, it's when final plat is recorded so you can sell lots. Multifamily, it's when you get your technical site plan or your building site plan approved, your final site plan that allows you to get a building permit. 100% of your impact fees have to be paid at that time. So at least, that doesn't necessarily alleviate the burden that the school district has to face in terms of figuring out how to make sure we have enough student stations, but it does provide them a lot more certainty with the amount of money that they get to work with, as this development is paying its fair share based upon the impact fee ordinance, which is supposed to pay for the impacts of the development. By design, that's what an impact fee is. So they're paying for it so the school board doesn't have to figure out another way to fund it or tax the county in general to pay for those student stations.
okay. Thank you.
Thank you. At this point, I would like to turn it over to the public. Anybody would like to come up? State your name and where you're from.
Good evening, Planning and Development Board members. My name is Roy Seeger. I'm the Director of Flagler Executive Airport. I'm here tonight just to, I know my comments are already in the report, but I just want to restate them again. So it is my recommendation not to approve the rezoning of the property described in application 330 from C2 and industrial to R3B based on the following reasons. This property is contiguous to the Flagler Executive Airport. The rezoning of the property would allow for the development of multifamily development, which is not compatible land use for the airport. This property was rezoned in 2021 under ordinance number 2021-10 from agriculture district to industrial district, which is a compatible land use, as a developer could construct warehouse facilities or other types of commercial industrial uses that would benefit the proximity to the airport and I-95. In addition to the incompatible land use, this request is not aligned with the recent approved Flagler County strategic plan outlined under economic vitality objectives, EV1 2.1 and 2.4. Flagler County does not have an abundance of large plots of land to be utilized for commercial industrial development. By approving its rezoning, it would further diminish the availability of large plots of lands for commercial industrial uses. Residential construction is a short-term job creator, while commercial industrial is a long-term job creator. The Flagler Executive Airport does have a perceived noise issue, which is continuously brought to my attention, as you can imagine. The addition of a multifamily development would potentially lead to over 510 new residents, bordering the third busiest general aviation airport in Florida. It would be inevitable that these new residents would complain about the aircraft noise as the neighborhood residents do now. I see no reason to exacerbate this issue when there are many other areas in Flagler County where a multifamily development could be better suited. And I also like to state that we have neighborhoods to the east, to the west, and to the south. I don't think we need to build them to the north. And finally, the Flagler Executive Airport continues to grow and getting busier. The airport is currently constructing 42 new T-hangar units, which will be completed in November 2023. We already have these units spoken for, as we have 147 people on our waiting list. There will be more construction hangars in the near future to meet the unmet demand for hangar space. And I also want, one of the comments was made too, is that planes come in the airport occasionally. Planes don't come in this airport occasionally, they come in there constantly. They are downplaying how busy this airport is. When those numbers, what they showed, 337, that is a very low number. We average over 500 operations a day. On the busiest day we ever had was over 1,200 operations in a day. So, any questions? I guess it's not. This is me making comments, so I guess there's no questions. So, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do we have anybody else that would like to come up and comment on this item? Seeing none, I will bring it back to the board for discussion.
Yeah, I think we need more multifamily residential in Flagler County. I've been up here for a couple of years now, and it seems like if you build it near a existing neighborhood, all the neighbors complain that it's incompatible with their housing and it's going to ruin their values. If you build it next to a rural area, then the people come in and they say, well, it isn't compatible with my farm. I don't know where else you build it. You got to build it somewhere. This looks like an ideal location to me. I'm unconvinced that the Planet Fitness and the racetrack gas station are supplemental uses that help the airport in any way. That's what's being developed along this roadway, not things that are support to the airport itself. We've only heard from some experts, and everybody else is just giving their opinion. The experts we've heard from say that the noise in this particular area is not an issue. I think this is a good use for the land, and I make a motion to approve.
Let me see if we have other comments from other board members before we make any motions. Thank you. Good.
Thank you. First of all, Adam, I did find, as Heather was pointing out, I did find some inconsistencies in the tables. But the tables did tell some stories. First of all, the garbage table, I think in a commercial project of any sort, there'd be a lot more garbage generated on the commercial side than you put. But conversely, I also think that the the trip generation that you had was probably closer. I'm not sure where the other trip generation came from, but that's beside the point. Jay, you had a trip generation that you showed. But there was two conflicting ones, and I do think that the commercial one would definitely produce less trips than the residential one. Here's my issue with the thing. While I'm talking a bit about the sound, because I know that there has been a perceived sound issue there, my comment on the sound report was that I don't think it's the end-all, be-all. I think it's a tool to look at, but I think there's issues with that sound study. Like I said, I think that I took several sound classes in college. I'm a general contractor, and I have to deal with sound. I've dealt with a lot of different issues about sound, and you can't convince me that a microphone nestled down in the trees is the same as somebody up on the third floor of that apartment complex without the trees really interfering with it, having the same sound effect. You can say whatever you want to say, but I know that's not true. I know that if you're on that third floor of that apartment, you're 100 feet away from the canopy, which is about the height of that building, that sound would come hitting you directly and vibrating the building, the glass, everything of that unit, which is totally different than a microphone 6 feet in the air nestled in a tree bed. So I think that the sounds, like you said, you're hearing insects. They're feet away from that microphone. And as he said, he's correct. If you're close to it, you're going to get a much greater effect of the sound. But to say that the insects are louder than a plane, it just tells you that study is not necessarily indicative of maybe what the real-world conditions be when the project is made. However, it does tell you something, and I question the amount of use of the airport. I think there's going to be more sound. That isn't really my issue. To be honest with you, my issue is that we have limited industrial space in this county. We have a lot of space to put residential projects and multifamily projects. They're all over the place. We have a ton of them. But industrial space is much more limited to find, and we need more of it. You're talking about people not in my backyard, they not in my backyard industrial space all day long. So we rezone this thing to incorporate an applicable use on that street, which is going to be the commercial and the industrial. That sounds very appropriate for that area. To get rid of valuable industrial space, which is not only a jobs producer, it's also a tax base. It's a good tax base for our community, and it's a service to have those type of facilities. I mean, everyone in the county benefits when we have correct commercial and industrial spaces versus having a whole bunch of bedroom communities everywhere. Everywhere you just keep putting a house and they sell, so developers want to come in and stick them in. I get that, but as far as the compatible use, for us to take that 50,000-foot view looking down on it, I just think that this land is just much more better suited for industrial space. You need to have a good road to service that. You have to have utilities, and you don't want to be nestled in a bunch of residential areas. So we're taking not only some space away, but we're also going to put right next to that thing some more. We have industrial space right next to that apartment complex. So we have more issues, again, sound, noise, and smells and everything else, because we're putting what could go arguably in many, many more places. Let's look at how much industrial space we have in this county. So I see traffic. I do see an issue with the perceived noise. And I would say that I don't think this is a great use of this land. I think that the land is better suited as it was zoned as industrial, and that's why I'm sort of opposing this land use change.
Mr. Chairman?
One second. Do you have a comment, young lady?
So I agree as well that we are in desperate need of multifamily for this community. And if you look at where this is being placed, you do see some homes to the west and the southwest. But right there with the airport, I know that I was told, the original plan for Palm Coast was Highway 100 and Town Center, that was our downtown. And I don't know if that's still correct, but you're going to have a random set of multifamily surrounded by commercial, warehouses, industrial, and by an airport that I do believe is going to only grow. And I know how busy that airport is, and I personally feel that the sound down there is intense. So although I love the project, I don't feel that for the flow of our community and for the location, that this would be the best for your residents either and for the residents of our community.
I want,
That's my 2 cents.
yeah, you know, I did like the layout of the,
I
I like the
love the
layout a lot. I
water
mean, as an apartment
and-
complex, I liked
Yes.
it. So, you know, kudos to the architect, but I thought, or the engineer in
Out
this
of
case.
place.
Yeah, that's what I think.
And we're trying to make that our mainstream, our downtown. And across over in Town Center, where we're also trying to incorporate our more commercial, we are having single-family homes. It's just those layouts, they seem to flow a little bit more than coming right off of Highway 100.
I have a concern for the limited industrial land that we have in Flagler County too. I know that's a problem. We've talked about that before. But this land's not going to be used for industrial purposes. Nobody's ever going to do that. It's going to be a big box. It's going to be a commercial shopping center. It's going to look like the rest of Highway 100. The reality is, if you start putting mixed use together, residential and commercial in areas that are close in proximity to each other, then you have a place for the people to shop close by. They can go to the restaurants close by. They can visit the airport. It's close by. To simply do a commercial strip down Highway 100 with no consideration for multifamily residential is bad planning, not good planning. Multifamily residential also is good for the environment, particularly when you stack structures in multi-level buildings. And so you conserve more green space when you do it that way. This is close to the Target Shopping Center. It's close to the new shopping center there at Airport Commons. It's got restaurants. It's got the school nearby. It's got our gas station right on the corner. It's a perfect location for multifamily residential. And so I disagree with the opposition that this is not compatible to this particular area in Flagler County. I think it's a perfect use.
Right, so we'll have the applicant rebuttal.
Mr. Chairman, we do have a motion on the floor, and I think as a proper procedure, we should at least deal with that motion, see if there's a second, and then we can go from there.
Absolutely. So I'll entertain a second if there's a second motion. Hearing none, we can continue with the applicant's rebuttal.
Well, okay.
Yeah, I just want to address a couple of things that were raised because they seem to be kind of fundamental to the positions that are being taken, both by the airport director as well as some of the members of the board. When we submitted our response to the technical review committee comments, that was one of the issues that was raised, was a shortage of industrial land. And although we can always use industrial land, there's a lot of industrial land in the county. There's a lot of industrial land in the county in the airport itself that requires some infrastructure. I think I predicted 147 acres in my response letter, and I was wrong. There was some wetlands that I didn't count for, but it was over 100 acres. The whole airport is industrial, and there's a lot of land to the south that is ideally suited for airport industrial type uses. But regardless of what ends up being developed there in the future, it's over 100 acres. That's just the airport that's owned by Flagler County. All of the land along Seminole Woods, the airport industrial development from Palm Coast Holdings, there's 2 phases to it. That was developed at the same time the racetrack was built, and it has been sitting there without any activity or any industrial development other than the racetrack that was built as part of that for over 10 years. So in terms of need, supply and demand, we have a very large supply of industrial that there's no demand for.
Jay, I mean, I think the chairman's being generous, giving you a third crack at the apple.
I get a rebuttal. It's
Right.
part of the procedures
Okay,
of
but I'm
the-
just
of the
saying,
board.
if you want to talk about need, I mean, so I compete with this property in my land. I own industrial property. I have people knocking my doors down. I'm putting a new building up right now. I won't even put it on the market. There's so many people bugging me to get in this building. That property, if that property was building what I'm building, they would do gangbuster business. You can name your price. I totally disagree with the concept that there's no need for it. I personally know there's huge need for it.
I didn't-
And we, if you look at our percentage of how much industrial space we have to residential in this county, as a land use issue, you would find that we're underserved. And whether we're using it right now or in the future, we do need it. So I just think that's a bad argument. I just don't want to to go down the road as if you haven't sold it, or, matter of fact, the road on Seminole Woods, I know something about those pieces, Jay, and the owners are not looking to develop them for, selling them for industrial. They've been looking for some different residential uses. They told me, I mean, I talked to them.
Yeah, because of how long they've been undeveloped as industrial, but if you let me finish my point, the point is that yes, where your property is not only ideal for industrial, but there is a demand for industrial. The property in this area, this particular parcel, never going to be an industrial property. It's going to be something akin to the BJ's or strip commercial. That's what it's going to be. There's just the value, because of the way the county zoning is written, which is, it's not industrial land. It is anything but residential land. That's what your zoning, how your zoning code is written. So there's, regardless of what the airport director might want to see built there, the landowner gets to make that final decision to whom he sells it to. And the price difference between selling land to anything but industrial is so different that nobody in their right mind would sell it for industrial unless there was no demand for commercial, which there is a demand for commercial. But to your point about the demand where your property is versus here is that the airport industrial project, which yes, I'm sure they want to change it to residential. That's the trend right now because that's what the market is calling for. But it was planned for and zoned for industrial. And it's been sitting there vacant for a very long time without the people banging down their doors to sell it for that use. So it's an area-wide issue in terms of different segments of the city along US 1 where your property is. Apparently has a high demand for industrial, which makes sense, honestly, because of the type of property that it is and the location that it's at and the access to both north and south. But in this area, the industrial land that exists, because if you look at the county map and the city map, there's a lot of industrial in this area, and we haven't seen any industrial development. We've seen commercial development, and we've seen residential development. And then as far as the location of the apartments and it not being a suitable location, there's apartments that have been built along, within town center, but not in the urban core, not the downtown portion of town center, that are just directly behind, Tom Gibbs Chevy. I mean, it's almost the same location in terms of the surrounding uses and surrounding zoning. I mean, the surrounding uses and surrounding zoning is commercial. Behind it is wetlands before you get into the rest of town center. So it's almost apples for apples, the same situation as far as the location. And those apartment projects are really nice. We recently did a rezoning on Old Kings Road behind where Kings Point is, just south of a parcel that's owned by Walmart. And the Tribute project, that's going to be a really nice apartment project. So to Mr. Connor's point, mixing these multifamily uses into locations where, one, they have been proven to work, and not only work but be quality, but also two, to find locations where we can build multifamily without having to make everybody around us angry. Because that's the problem, is that when we try to find a transitional use, which is what you would, in a kind of a pure abstract planning concept, you have low-density residential, higher-density residential, highest-density residential, and then your commercial and industrial zones. That's kind of like the standard Euclidean zoning principles. That doesn't work, primarily because the people who live in the low and medium-density residential areas don't want the high-density residential near them. And so we keep bringing multifamily projects. It doesn't seem to matter where we bring them. There's always going to be opposition. But in this particular case, we did our homework to make sure that we were building something that was compatible with the adjacent land uses. And because there will be no industrial uses adjacent to it. There's going to be Airport Commons, Phase 1 and 2. Behind that, the county bought that land. It's almost all wetlands, so there's nothing to the west. And then everything to the east is BJ's. So this is all that's left. That's going to be, like I said, it's very comparable to the projects that are closest to 100 along the perimeter commercial areas of town center, which is how they're designated in the PUD. For the town center PUD, they're known as the perimeter commercial areas. Those apartment projects are and compared to the comparable uses around them, almost identical to this project. So I just wanted to point that out because this concept of there being, this project is going to somehow take away from the industrial inventory, it's just not true. Because this project's not going to, this property will not be developed for industrial. It will either be developed for as proposed or a commercial development similar to what's next to it on both sides. And in terms of whether it's good planning, I agree with Mr. Connor 100%. This is how multifamily is being developed and planned right now, to create a mixture, to reduce trips, to benefit from internal capture, and to put the multifamily uses in places that doesn't make the residential neighbors mad, which is the biggest obstacle to getting multifamily projects approved. So that's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments?
Yeah, so-
among the board?
I definitely understand, Mr. Connor, what you're talking about, trying to mix it up with the zoning. I was in Jacksonville yesterday, I think it was yesterday, over to the town center. I don't know if you've been to that development. And right along the road, they have both hotels, and they have apartments, and they have shopping. It's all mixed in. The traffic on that area is intense. It's just red lights every 20 feet, no, not 20 feet, but every couple hundred feet there's a red light. It's a very, you're putting a lot of density into one area. There's some good aspects to it, bad aspects to it. Whether or not that's the best or not, I'm not going to argue with it, because there's some things I like about it, some things I don't like about it. My biggest part, I do disagree with Jay, and I know Jay, so I'm, hope he understands. I'm just speaking from my heart and not out of one way or the other. There is not enough industrial in this county, and the use of the industrial space is underutilized because a lot of developers are going for the fast buck. They're going for the proven thing. Personally, I would build more if I had the bandwidth. I would do more. There's such a need, and I know there's only limited places in our county to do the industrial. That's a bigger hurdle to jump over than a residential. But if this land had residential zoning on it already, and it was in an area that was, we're not taking the industrial area away, I would have less of an issue with it. I do have somewhat of an issue with the idea of creating more of a perceived issue at the airport, but that is not my big issue. My biggest issue is the lack of, is what this land should be used for and what it is. Whether or not it's a warehouse, whether or not it's a BJ's, whether or not it's flex space is what I do, or any number of other things. There's a lot of potential uses we could put here, and there's not a lot of other places now or next year or 5 years or 10 years. So every time we take residential, we take this type of space, this industrial space, and the developer wants to do it, and let's face it, they're selling it that way because there's more money per acre. They can make more money per acre. So I get it. If I was selling it, I would be interested in making the most amount of money per acre. That's why we're here, because we're not getting money for the deal. We're just looking at it on the abstract. That's why I'm trying to look at it from the 30,000 square foot, foot area, not square foot, but area, look down at it, and I'm thinking that this, as I start looking at the availability of a land, where are we going to create this industrial? Where are we going to do it? As we take it away off the market, what's left? So I hold fast in what I think, that I think it's just more appropriate leaving it the way it is than creating another residential thing in the middle of all that, where, like I said, I've seen it used before, but those other areas weren't industrial changed over. Those are agricultural spaces the whole thing was planned development, big, huge developments that were made to encompass that residential. Now we're taking a residential use and putting it in there because it benefits the seller, but it's not necessarily the best possible use of the property. So that's why I don't know if there's another concept, but I make a motion to deny it, and we're only a recommending body anyway, so all we're doing is sending this up to the county. So I make a motion to deny it.
So we have a motion on this item here. I'll entertain a second. Second, okay. So all those in,
Well, we got to have some discussion.
Sorry.
I don't know if Mr. Connor wants to.
Mr. Chairman,
No, I have no further discussion.
if I could ask, though, so the motion would be denial because the finding of the board is that the request is inconsistent with the comprehensive plan, correct?
Correct.
Okay, Thank you.
On 2 points.
All
Want me
right,
to
so,
reiterate those 2 points?
Probably wouldn't be bad to do so, yes,
Yeah,
sir. for the
I
record.
think the the land zoning that's there is more appropriate than changing it to residential. I also believe that the economic factor of it being left in there is more appropriate than changing it to residential.
For the record, if I thought for a minute that this property would be used for industrial purposes, I might have a different opinion and a different mindset, but it never will be. And I think holding it out for industrial use is a pipe dream.
any other comments? All right, so let's put it to the vote. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those are in favor of our nay,
Of our
of our
opposing.
motion?
About
Opposing it.
of opposing.
Yes.
So, all those opposed?
Aye.
Aye. We have 3,
You too.
2.
You're opposed to my motion, correct?
I'm opposed to the development there.
Then then it's the 3, well, you might want to take your vote again.
All those in favor for this
No,
application?
My motion is to deny the motion.
And do we have a second?
I second that.
Second that. So all those in favor to deny application 3330, say aye.
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 All those opposed,
Nay.
say nay. Aye. So application 3330 does not pass, right?
No, the motion passes.
Motion passes.
But you voted in favor of denial of the motion, correct? Okay. It's just
3 votes.
3-1. Okay.
Was that clear? You want me to repeat it?
Nope, I think we got it.
Got it right the
I think we got it.
John, did you get that?
Yeah, we got it. 3-1, the application is denied. Recommended denial to the county commission. We should still go forward with the hearing on the rezoning, for the record.
Okay.
Hopefully we've heard the arguments, hopefully we can speed it up quite a bit, but for purposes of the record, the rezoning application is a quasi-judicial matter, unlike the legislative one you just did. So it's quite important we get our findings on the record.
All right, so we'll move on to the next item, 5. It's a quasi-judicial requirement, disclosure of ex parte communications. Does anybody have any
No?
disclosures? No? All right, so application 3331, rezoning from C2 General Commercial and Shopping Center District and 1 Industrial District to R3B Multifamily Residential District. Adam?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so we've got the same graphics we had previously, the flood zone, soils, wetlands, aerial for the project, 28 acres. The rezoning's consistent with the Flume Amendment, allows for the multifamily development, cannot take effect until the Flume Amendment becomes effective. The utilities are required due to the proposed densities of the project, and the R3B district itself requires utility connection. Annexation will likely follow because Palm Coast requires that as part of their prerequisite for utility connection. Compatibility concern based on the noise complaints, which we've talked about from single-family residents near the airport. Noise study indicates airport at acceptable levels. Again, those being the FAA levels and the limits. You've seen this graphic. Our rezoning then takes those respective parts of the C2 and the industrial, coordinating or coinciding with the both the land uses that we had in the previous application, and then that entire hatched area that's shown here would be the proposed limits of the R3B. So you have the majority portion industrial zoning, that smaller portion to the north that's got the C2 zoning presently, the general commercial and shopping center that would be cut out would be then all total then, that hatching would then be the proposed residential zoning, the R3B. Superimposed over the graphic with the aerial and the graphic for the proposed development, as you've seen before. Still have those C2 parcels along the frontage, and then the graphic we saw previously about the, in your packet, but this is close to one that was included in the packet or in the previous presentation by the applicant. This shows a little different, shorter distances because this is to the, I think that's an existing taxiway is what that's showing there. And so the actual runway would be further to the south, and then the proposed runway extension would actually be further south there even more so. But these 700-foot minimum distances there that are shown are areas where the planes would be taxiing to be able to access that main runway as it exists now. With that, again, I'll close, await any questions or comments out of the interest of time. Have the recommendation, the options for the recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners on this request. Very similar as the previous item. These would be approval of the rezoning, finding that the rezoning is consistent with the Flagler County Comprehensive Plan, the Land Development Code. A recommendation for denial, finding that the application is not consistent with the Flagler County Comprehensive Plan and the Flagler County Land Development Code, or continuance for some purpose for either staff or the applicant to come back to the board, provide some additional evidence or testimony. I would ask, as Mr. Moylan had said, please do place findings on the record, as this is a quasi-judicial proceeding. We do want you to just place specific findings. And I think, correct me on this, Sean, that your findings cannot or shouldn't be just limited to, well, we said denial on the previous one, so therefore this one should be denial. Please place something more specific on the record than just that. And with that, I'll close, wait for questions or comments, and then turn it over to Mr. Livingston for anything he'd like to clarify specific to the rezoning.
Good, thank you, Adam. Do we have any questions for staff before we have the applicant come up? Would you like to come up, please?
Well, as I noted, this was a combined presentation, so there's not much to add because we wrapped most of the presentation materials into both presentations. But just, again, to show you, this is the actual proposed rezoning. It is important what Adam noted about the annexation. It's actually not it may be annexed. It's a mandatory annexation area there. So this will be annexed into the city of Palm Coast when water services are requested. And so, how long this stays in the county, I think BJ's pre-annexation agreement was already approved. Airport Commons Phase 1 has been annexed. The land use designation was mixed use, and I believe it was rezoned to C2, so that kind of gives you an idea of the zoning that would probably be in effect in the future. But other than that, I don't have anything to add because it's the presentation was relevant to both the land use change as well as the rezoning, unless you have any questions. Yeah.
I do. Jay, have you talked to Palm Coast about their intent, where they had any issue with industrial space versus, or did you even have that conversation with them?
Well, the Palm Coast code is almost the opposite of the county code in terms of industrial, whereas in the county, you have industrial flume, industrial zoning, but the industrial allows everything but non-residential. In the city of Palm Coast, you have a very tight industrial zone that only allows industrial. Based upon the planning in the area, I would bet that the only thing that this would become would be a mixed-use designation based upon the county's future land use, the city's future land use. That's what they chose to make Airport Commons. It's what Town Center is. It's what everything wrapping around is, with the exception of the industrial areas. And then that would not allow industrial uses. That would allow everything. There are some high-intensity commercial uses that could also be allowed in the county's industrial, but it would not be a straight industrial area.
And if the apartment or the commercial, one of the commercial buildings is built, is that the entire, 50 acres or whatever, is that all encompassed or just the parcel that's being developed into the city?
It would be, anything that needs water is going to be annexed into the city.
But if you have a bunch of commercial strips and you got an apartment complex and you got some other properties that aren't shown on here as the overall size of the property, if anything wants any water, they take this entire piece into the city or just the part that wants the water?
That's a good question. It depends on how you slice up the development, but it's where the water is needed. I don't believe the property that's to the west of this parcel, which I believe is now owned by the county, and is designated industrial would ever change, because the county purchases water wholesale
But
from
this,
the
this is
city.
one, this is, you're outlining as one parcel, not a multiple parcels.
The city would not let us, let's say we did the multifamily first, and that's where we requested water.
They would take the commercial up
They
front.
would take,
too.
yeah, because otherwise
Okay.
we'd create an enclave, and that would violate the annexation statute. Yes, sir.
All right, thanks.
Questions for the applicant? At this point, we'll turn it over to the public if anybody wants to come up and comment on this item. Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the board for comments. Do we have any additional comments or questions for staff on this?
Well, my comment to staff would be, or question to staff, which I kind of know the answer. I made a motion to deny the first one that did pass. Denying the future land use map means making the rezoning at this point a moot point, as far as you can't rezone it if we don't have the map changed, correct? We cannot, no, but we can't approve this for that reason in itself. That's not the finding of it, but that would be, if you couldn't not approve the map and approve this, correct?
Mr. Langelo,
I'm just a structural issue, we could not do that, correct?
no, that's incorrect.
But we can make a zoning change and not change the future map.
You are the recommending body. So if, you can't presume that the county commission will deny the future land use map.
No, I understand that.
So you may want to make a recommendation of the rezoning without even considering what you just voted on the future land use map.
Okay. Okay. If there's not another motion, I am also going to make the recommendation to deny it for the same reasons I had before, which is basically that's inconsistent with the land development code or the comprehensive plan, and also for that same thing for the compatibility to the surrounding area.
I second.
So we have a motion and a second, a motion on the application 3331. And this would be rezoning from C2, denial from rezoning from C2 to R3B. All those in favor of denial, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those in favor to,
Nay.
nay, okay. So motion is denied on application 3331. Next item on tonight's agenda. That's item number 6, and that is a quasi-judicial requiring disclosure of ex parte. Does anybody have any disclosures to make on application 3345? Okay, so this is a special exception in the see-through general commercial and shopping center district. Adam?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you may know about this property. This is Tomoka Marine, and it's
Excuse me, Adam.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry. I thought this was another item. I do have an ex parte communication to divulge. I was at an event, and the applicant had come up to me to start to talk about this item, and I asked them not to get into too much of the weeds, and basically to bring it up to the board, and we would hear all the evidence tonight.
Thank you. Go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, future land use as depicted here, so the frontage being the mixed-use, high-intensity, and then the back portion being agriculture and timberlands. The development's presently done. You'll see that here in an aerial. You can actually see it here underlying the zoning, where it's developed as a mini warehouses along with outside storage. That frontage on the parcel had been the subject of a special exception that we had not too long ago for a produce operation. The special flood hazard area, bulk of the property being an unshaded X zone, small portion at the very south end being shaded X, all of that, with the exception of that small little tidbit there on that east side, being in a special flood hazard area, the green there portion that is part of that special flood hazard area, that's Zone A. But the majority of it here being outside the special flood hazard area, not of a concern for us from any portion there. as far as its development. Yeah, the soils map being a little interesting here because it does show depressional soils. I do think there have been some history maybe with this and maybe some wetland characteristics prior to its development. Certainly after its development and its long-term development, the wetlands are not present on the site, and that's indicative and displayed here with the wetlands map from the National Wetlands Inventory. Development had effectively taken care of any wetland concerns that are there. And I'd even say maybe the soils map may be a bit incorrect because you can see here there are no wetlands that magically end at the property line. So ordinarily, if we see some development activity that's happened that's taking away those characteristics, you would see them abruptly end with a nice straight line where that development has occurred. We don't have that here. And then the aerial, again, that's depicting that outdoor storage area for the bulk of the property, along with the storage buildings there at basically the northeast quadrant. You can see with this aerial also where those tents were present for the previous produce roadside vendor that had been approved. And so if you remember back, the entirety of this 9 acres in its area, sales area previously had been limited to that frontage along Moody, along State Road 100. We had the use change hands fairly quick after we had done the special exception, and it fairly quickly also became a permanent setup following the Flagler Beach vendor changes, is what I understood, and how they ended up changing some of their relationship on how they handled the vendors in that town square area in Flagler Beach. And the next thing we know, this produce vendor has permanent operations that are set up along with permanent tents, contravening the special exception that was approved. A new operator, lessee, is seeking this special exception approval. So I'm mentioning that history just factually, but the new operator is aware of our requirements and the need to be able to take it down and put it back up on a daily basis. Their proposal is that varied mix of artisan vendors and food trucks. And then as we have, it's come up several times, maybe it's without real consideration of the roadways, but we've had it come up previously, and I want to make sure I mention it here. Roadway access, driveway access is uniquely vested with DOT here in this situation. So we don't control acceleration or deceleration lanes. We tell the operator of a business or proposed operator to contact DOT, work with them on any required improvements. The configuration that's there with the 2 driveways with the to the west side and the out to the east seems to be satisfying DOT. Certainly, this will be evaluated on an ongoing basis. If there are traffic concerns, we will work with DOT to solve those, but we are not the authority for this. And so it's something that too often it ends up getting confused, and just want to make sure I said that on the record. This is that last iteration of their plan. This was submitted in response to the Technical Review Committee comments, and you can see the layout there in front of those buildings. These buildings here being the limits of the existing storage buildings that are present on the property. You'll recall that the produce operation had been previously set up here in this northeast quadrant of the property. And what they're proposing here is food trucks, lines of food trucks along the frontage in that northwest quadrant, and then restrooms and maybe more food trucks over here on that west side. Their vendor spaces with their vendor tents then being in that bottom portion of that northwest quadrant, that south side of the northwest quadrant, parking throughout, rope areas to be able to guide the public, trash cans for the needs that we have identified in the special exception for refuse collection, light poles that are existing, so you have those existing lights that are there, and then proposed signage. You can see that they've, we believe, showing a 2-sided sign, and I've mentioned this in the staff report, what we would believe they could be allowed to have. They could have a permanent sign is what we've actually said. And then with their vendors then having the sandwich signs, the temporary sandwich signs respective to what they're vending. And then this taken from the application itself, summarizing the limitations that are present on the property, the numbers of vendors, 20 potential vendors with their tents, produce tent being limited to that 30 by 30-foot area, a food truck space with 5 food trucks in total, and that pedestrian walking area, the one-way driving that I mentioned from the west to the east, angled parking, and then the vendor parking behind that gated area to the south of where the vendors would have their tents set up. It's in a fenced area that's in front of the Tomoka Marine offices. And then at the bottom, I copied in the permitted vending itself of the products that's included in their application, so that, we had made the inquiry as part of the technical review committee comments, is this just going to be a glorified flea market? And we believe that the applicant's response to that and what she believes she wants to have as far as her uniqueness of the products, preventing someone from coming with the same products, I think addresses this in a very satisfactory way, at least for our comments. Concerns potentially may still be there, but about clothing would be, the intent there is that it's something that's made. It's not something that's picked up from China, and you're not dumping your fake Nikes at this facility. Your sports military memorabilia, those would be along the lines of collectibles. I think there's a section here, maybe it's home decor. And so again, those things that are made and not necessarily bought and then just vended here. You'll see through our conditions that we still have that main condition, and those first 3 that you see listed are those that all roadside vendors must meet. And so the first consideration you have is that you can't be vending a product that's elsewhere available within 500-foot distance of this roadside vending operation. So that's the first test for us. And because of this location, we believe that's being met, and we would require that that's met on a continuing basis. Safe ingress and egress, and then the county business tax receipt. Those are the 3 criteria that have to be met as the precursor for the roadside vending operation within the C2 district. That's the 3 preconditions as part of the special exception. The remaining items that I've listed are those that we believe as staff should be included in this application. So not unlike others, special exception running with the land, roadside vendors set up and take down, no setup that would be allowed overnight. Roadside vendors operating are required to secure their roadside vending operation during any intermittent severe weather. I'm not talking about just your rainstorm. I'm talking about something that's of some significance. We don't want these vendors to become rafted debris or something that could then go and become a traffic hazard on 100. Vendors limited to those listed items that they had, with the addition, and you had those also on the application, nonprofit agencies and the food trucks that they had listed. Location on the site of those particular vendors consistent with the site plan. Refuse collected in the trash cans, disposed of with ordinary waste, and along with that, commercial pickup unless it needs to be handled in some other special way. And that's also consistent with the vendor agreement that the applicant has put in. You'll see on the applicant's vendor agreement that everyone as a vendor takes care of their own, that they leave it as they found it. Parking associated with this will not be permitted in the State Road 100 Moody Boulevard right-of-way. We've asked that if some event's happening and you have some queuing of traffic, that the applicant then would have staff that would go and tell folks to come back. We don't have any available parking. You're going to need to get out of the right-of-way. You're going to need to move on. And so that we've asked that be monitored by the applicant should it be needed to do so, and that they then control the parking if it's required to be done, so that there is no activity that extends beyond the property line, nothing within the right-of-way. Signs and lighting, all configured in such a manner, again, maintain traffic safety, minimize glare on adjacent properties. Signage for the use limited, as we've listed, for those themselves, for those vendors. Individual vendors can have menu boards. A single two-sided sign no larger than 32 square feet, I'm saying I think I'd like to have that allowed, meeting the required minimum setbacks if the vendor would like to, if they'd like to do that. I think from a standpoint of advertising the operation, I think that would be something that I would have no problem with, and I've listed it in the condition. Again, no signs within the State Road 100 right-of-way. Days and hours of operation limited to 11 a.m. to dusk daily, was set up to begin no earlier than 9 a.m. So they'd set up at 9 a.m., be open to the public at 11, and then close at dusk. They did put a different set of hours as far as closing. We don't have a problem if they continue through till dusk. Use of amplified speakers associated with anything no more than 80 dBA operating at the property as measured at the property line of the subject parcel. We do have a noise ordinance. We do have an ordinance that talks about amplified sound. And I don't think there'll be any issues with that, but that does allow someone to have music if they wish to as part of a food truck operation or a vendor operation. Vendors and food trucks required to obtain and maintain a business tax receipt along with any other licensing that's required for their operation. Vendors and food trucks shall not have permanent connections to on-site utilities, again, a condition that the applicant has listed in their requirements. And driveway connection, as I mentioned, to State Road 100, subject to permit approval from DOT, and will be subject to those requirements on an ongoing basis for the duration of the use. Any problems come up, DOT is going to tell us, they'll tell us after they tell the applicant. With that, I'll close, await any questions or comments, submit my full report for the record with this, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
I have a question.
We have a question for staff.
Could you go up that list? I think there was 12, item 12. So the signage, Adam, you're talking about a signage up at the street to advertise the overall project.
Yes, sir.
But these vendors are going to be allowed on their tents and other places to put signage and whatnot. We're not limiting the tents. Okay.
sir.
And also, number 15, I think. 15 is just an iteration of what the law already is, whether we put that here or not. That's the law, and we're just stating it so that they would know it, but we're not, in effect, trying to change any particular ordinance or law.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. How is it monitored that the staff is going to make sure that people, because I've been at the flea market, I don't know how they're going to fit 40 cars in there. They barely fit 40 cars in there with just the one produce side. And now we're talking about multiple food trucks and 20 additional things to purchase. So how are we going to monitor that their staff, how is that monitored, is going to tell them to not be stopped on Highway 100?
I think it will be complaint driven, and so we'll be watching it. And our biggest consideration there is that if there's any queuing of traffic that happens in 100, that anything that becomes even on its face any kind of traffic hazard, that's going to be the part that's going to tell us that we need to figure something else out.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions for staff? All right, is the applicant willing to come up and comment?
Good evening, Commission. My name is Amber Embers. I'm the owner of the Cosmic Hippie, and I am the organizer of this proposed project. So the reason why this project even came to existence is because I, as a
Ms.
vendor-
Embers, I'm sorry to stop you. If you could just, yes, ma'am, thank you. Perfect,
Oh.
sorry.
I know I'm short. So the reason why we came up with this project in general is because we own our own business, and we have been vendors in this town for almost 3 years now. We've been specifically only working at European Village, but then over time, we've been starting to host our own events as well. And we've been getting the same feedback over and over again from other vendors, which is we need more sales. There's no events in this area where they can set up shop on a weekly basis or regular basis where they can count on that income. Our vendors are currently driving up to St. Augustine, up to Jacksonville, down to Daytona, just to make money. To me, that doesn't make sense, and especially once I became a vendor, that definitely didn't make sense for our household. So I wanted to make something where we can keep all of our vendors in our town making money and, in turn, growing our community. And with this project, to answer your question about the flea market thing, this will not be a flea market. The reason why I am not allowing it to be a flea market is because I want people to actually come on a regular basis. So I'm going to have different vendors on a regular basis coming in and out. Everybody will have unique items that they have to make themselves. Nothing can be store-bought and just like resold. That's not what we're about. This market is going to be for our artists specifically. So I want to elevate their, their talents. Nobody knows that they're around here unless they go to Orlando and purchase their stuff. So this is going to be for our artists to do, canvas artwork, or they make artesian breads every week, or, custom chocolates and cheesecakes and things like that. Whereas, I think people are starting to think that this may become like a Daytona flea market kind of thing, where people just bring whatever they have to sell and make money. That is not at all what's going to be allowed. And furthermore, when we do get applications, I require each applicant to send me pictures of what they do, photographs of their entire setup, so I can see like the level of professionalism that they're going to be bringing to the market. And I also require that they have some type of like a digital portfolio or something where people who are coming to the market can say, oh yeah, I want to come here and buy that this week. So those are like the things that I've already put in place to make sure that this market is more of a higher level thing than a flea market. Oh, and to address your questions about the traffic and monitoring that, he's our security guy. He's an expert. He's a disabled veteran. He knows what he's doing. He always monitors all of our traffic at all of our events. We've hosted plenty of events in town. And
My name is Julio Torres. I used to be a firefighter in the Navy. So basically, it's like I know high stress, basically also how to like basically on there's safety issues, CPR, and so forth. And it's basically making sure everything's done the right way.
And we have also reached out to some of our vendors who already showed interest. 2 of them have already offered to be like our fallback people. So if anything were ever to happen to one of us where we cannot be present on the property, we already have 2 people who are already going to be a regular vendor who would also act as like a touch point for the other vendors should we not be present.
Okay. I have one more question.
We have any questions for the applicants?
So nothing is permanent on the site. The restrooms, what are those then?
So the restrooms are actually the porta potties, the portalettes.
Okay.
And they can be removed if we needed them to be removed, but right now they're just being serviced on a weekly basis. We do have 2 different ones, one standard and one for handicap accessible, so people can access it with a wheelchair.
Okay.
And we also have a hand washing station that's separate too. So, if people are going to the food trucks, they can actually wash their hands instead of just using Purell or, whatever. They can actually clean themselves.
Questions for the applicant? No questions? All right, so thank you.
Thank you.
And at this point, we'll bring it out to the public. If anybody wants to come up and comment on this item, please do so. Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the board. Any board discussion on this?
I think that 5 food trucks on that property, trying to incorporate all of that parking is going to be nearly impossible. I'd like to talk about limiting it to 3 food trucks. Not on site, I can't measure it, so this is me remembering being there before December when it closed down. What do you think, Langelo? Everybody take note, Langelo is silent.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Adam, have you done any analysis yourself of the parking, and is the 5 going to be an issue? I know that those are, limited times that they seem to have that sort of traffic, so people don't eat at necessarily 3 o'clock the same way they eat it at noon. But I mean,
Thinking about the dog park thing and how we were talking about the limiting of how many we can bring on there.
In some, and I do think when what you're, my own experience, what I've seen here before, I think there's been a truck that's been operating kind of off and on. And what I've seen happening is almost what you'd expect some folks to do that, and I get it, their goal, and I don't have a problem with it, them putting out a picnic table or several picnic tables so you can eat there. Where I'm heading is that I think there's a fair number of people who are patrons of the food trucks who come and buy the food and then leave. And so there's kind of this rotation that's happening there. And at least that's what I've seen with the current truck that's been operating from the site. And it hasn't created a substantial traffic issue because they're on site about 10 minutes until their order is complete and then they leave.
Right. But space-wise is what, because that's one of the benefits, right, for both the food truck and the vendors is, yes, I want food. Oh, well, while we're here, we might as well poke around through the vendors, vice versa. I'm just thinking of that space. You've probably measured it 1,000,000 times. So you've seen that 5 food trucks can fit right in front of there and incorporate everything else, including the parking. It looks like you have the row of trash cans.
Yes, we definitely measured, let me see, we're looking at the map right here. This one doesn't have the measurements, but basically what we allotted for the food trucks, I believe, was 15 feet per food truck. Because what we're not allowing, and I think this might be an answer to your question too, is certain food trucks come with trailers, like it's a pickup truck and a trailer, like a smoker or something on the back. So if we have a food truck vendor who has a situation like that, we're going to be requiring him to remove the trailer from his pickup truck, park his pickup where the vendor parking is behind the fence, and just leave the trailer there. So that's how we're kind of minimizing the amount of space per food truck, is we pretty much took the average length of each vehicle and then the average length of each trailer, and then we calculated how many could fit with a little bit of wiggle room in between during that frontage area.
Okay. That was my question.
I do have a question. So how would 3 food trucks versus 5 food trucks affect your business plan?
It mostly depends on the type of food trucks we're able to get at that specific time. So the reason why we said 5 is because we want to have a nice variety of food there. We don't want to have 5 smokers, So we want to be able to have like a guy who does meat, somebody who does just kombucha, somebody who just does ice cream. So it might not necessarily be all food. It might just be something that's served out of a food truck. So for instance, we have the mini donuts people. So, people aren't always going to be coming for donuts every day. Or we might have somebody who serves kombucha out of a truck. Somebody might just be coming to get their jar filled and then they leave. So those kind of things still count as food trucks, but they're not necessarily serving meals, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Adam, is there a required amount of, on a vendor space, of toilets or porta-john to use for, how does that affect into it? Is there a required amount? Is there something that an ordinance would trip in and make them add additional porta potties to it if need be, that we're not looking at now? All I'm saying is, so we put the 5 in. I kind of think that, let's say they have 100 people visiting their place on a weekend, that putting 5 of them in there or 3 of them in there probably won't increase the overall amount of visitors. It just give the visitors more of a variety. It may hurt them. They may end up finding that your comment of the 3 may be where they want because 5 of them aren't surviving, but 3 of them are thriving. But if they do have 5, and it is, there are more. There's 125 people showing up or 150 people showing up. Is there something that trips the amount of toilets that they would need because now this is just becoming an issue? There's not enough toilets out there.
I think, and it's probably not a regulatory answer as much as it's kind of the common sense, obvious answer that if they're having an issue with that and they're having to service them more often, then the quick answer would be you provide more of them. And especially if maybe they're coming into, I think these would end up being permanently set up and just would be serviced. I was thinking if you're coming into a busy time, like maybe a Memorial Day weekend or a July 4th event or something like that, that maybe then they would have those more available in a greater number. But I think that, to me, there's a couple of limiting factors that are here that are going to prevent this from being too big. First being the obvious size of the property, second the parking, second the restrooms, and and I'm hearing what you're saying, but I think that's really something that they'll need to self-police. That if it's too heavily utilized, if you follow where I'm heading, then they'll end up creating a not an optimal customer experience, and they'll hear about it. And so it'll be in their best interest to have more of those and have them serviced more often if that's needed to happen.
Okay.
I think you're also
right. We don't have a mechanism in and of itself anyway to regulate that. I agree that the customer experience is going to affect them, but as a body who's looking at rules and regulations, I didn't know if there was something that was automatically kicking in and that they're just going to have to, no. I know that, do we have a special events ordinance that has anything to do with that?
We do, but that's, because of the special exception, because of us going through the roadside
It's not
vendor,
a special
that's not applicable
Okay.
here.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
There's some built-in constraints here too. This is a right-in, right-out only.
Right.
You know, only people going east on 100 are going to be able to access the unit. And then there's a traffic light at Colbert Lane that slows traffic down on a regular basis. So there's some limiting factors that make this more desirable than if it were people making left turns out into traffic on a 4-lane highway and that sort of thing. This spot's been used for this kind of activity for a while, and, I mean, I live in this neighborhood. I have to slow down and sometimes stop for cars going in and out of there, but it's not ever been, in my experience, a dangerous situation.
So I got to say that driving by 100 towards the beach and seeing that lot empty, there's something not feeling right about that. I'm used to seeing that produce market there, and every now and then stopping there with my wife to buy some produce. So you are going to have produce.
Absolutely.
Correct. Right, that's not
Absolutely.
going away. Okay. So I think it's a wonderful idea. You know, after your presentation, and you're saying that you're going to make an upscale, not, you know,
Yes,
it's not going to
very
be
upscale, yep.
like Adam was saying, it's not going to be a flea market type of place.
Correct.
And with his background and expertise, safety factor is one of the most important things, as you know. So there's going to be a roped area so that the kids.
Correct. So the whole parking area is completely roped off. So when people even want to go to the food trucks, they're going to have to walk around the roped area
Okay,
to
so there's
access.
going to be a roped off walkway for the kids to be in there, because that's another thing.
Correct.
You have like he was saying, that the cars come in and out, you have to keep an eye on the kids. So I think it's a wonderful idea for what's there now. There's a food vendor there now. It's very small of produce.
Correct.
Is that the same people that are going to be working with
He
you?
will still be there. We just need to, you know, touch base with him as far as what the requirements are for his aspect of the whole operation.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, so thank you. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
your presentation. At this time, I'll bring it out to the public. We did that already? Oh, okay, so we have a motion?
I make a motion to approve with staff recommended conditions. Do you want me to list those out? Okay, thanks.
Have a second.
Go ahead, I'm not getting very far tonight, so
Well,
I don't want to jinx it.
You stop.
I'll second the motion.
All right, so we have a motion and a second for application, which application is it? 3345, correct?
Correct.
Yes, so all those in favor, say aye.
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 Signify by saying aye. And all those that oppose signify by saying nay. I said aye. So 3-1?
No.
No, unanimous, so approved. Application 3045 is approved. All right, so let's go on to number 7, correct? Quasi-judicial requiring disclosure of ex parte communication. Anybody has anything?
sir.
All right, application 3346, site development plan review in a PUD. Adam?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is, we knew it as a different name. This should be the Celadine, and it is coming through on our agenda for the Board of County Commissioners, the next upcoming agenda for a final plat approval. This is the future land use, what it looks like there with the mixed-use, low-intensity, consistent with the DRI designation, the PUD zoning in place, the flood zone, not a special flood hazard area, not a concern for us there. Mix of soil types, and some of which, again, the 8 being a depressional soil. We do have some areas of wetlands that were provided within our PUD site development plan, if we go back in the way back machine, that were originally flagged and then had been identified on a preliminary plat for being areas that would be set aside in part of a water management district parcel that matches up with what we see then here in the area of the roundabout, those soils there corresponding with some on-site wetlands. So all that taken care of, and then the aerial that we have for the property and showing that what we have referred to before, the piney flatwoods that are consistent with much of Flagler County. And so this specific request is coming to us now because when the PUD was originally done, the PUD document itself provided for model home development. However, there wasn't a specific site plan, a specific detail provided. And we anticipate that we'll start seeing more of these come in and be incorporated into the PUDs if we have more PUDs coming in, where we'll have a detail provided for a sales center. Our hand-wringing as staff has been that when a sales center comes in, as distinguished from a model home itself, a sales center typically has along with it parking. And if you're having exceptional parking, something that's beyond parking in a residential driveway, then that creates an issue for us because a residential lot that's approved through a PUD site development plan, through a preliminary plat, through a final plat, can only be used as a home site. And so we're seeing more of these. The national builders especially look at these and say, well, we do this everywhere else. How come you're different? We never hear that in Flagler County at all. And so it's this idea that we need to have more of these happening. We'll likely have them happening more often with the PUDs when they come in. This one didn't have it happen that way. National builders now coming in, D.R. Horton, and looking at it and saying, I want to have these model homes. I can have up to 5 model homes, and then up to 5 of the model homes can be used as, out of the 5, 3 of the model homes can be used as temporary sales centers. So to us, the distinction, if you think about it as we're trying to conceptualize it, model home itself, not a problem. Homes built, looks on the face of it as a model home. Has no other outward appearance other than being a model home, may have a small banner that's outside that says, welcome. You know, this is our model home, so you can distinguish it from its others as the building program occurs. Temporary sales center, the distinction there is that there's a lot or lots that are being used for something else other than model home development, parking typically being that something else. And so what will happen then with these when that's all done, when that temporary sales center use is suspended, when that ends, the parking lot will be removed. The changes, if there were any, to the model homes themselves, that garage conversion that happens for the sales office will be undone. The garage door, if it was removed, will be put back in place. And then what you'll end up in the end is the single-family lot that you started out with at the beginning. Specific to Groveside, specific to what we used to call Celadine, this is coming into Groveside at Ormond Station, there are 3 lots that are together forming the temporary sales center, 2 model homes on 19 and 20, and then the parking area on lot 18. So that's what you have before you. It's not something that's in the totality of it. You're not amending the PUD site development plan for the entirety of the development. You're placing an approval on, if you choose to provide a recommendation for approval, your recommendation will go on to the Board of County Commissioners because it is a PUD site development plan. But you're amending that PUD site development plan in its very small portion, these 3 lots, only these 3 lots, for their temporary use together as a temporary sales center. 2 model homes together, 3 lots composing a temporary sales center. Here's that graphic that I included, so you have the landscaping, the feel of what that will look like. It goes beyond that kind of survey type view that's there. And so you can see then the approved parking area along with the landscaping that will go with that. And with that, we've kept it very simple with this, your recommendation options with this application, along with the next one that we'll take in turn. Approval of the PUD site development plan, denial, or continuance. Certainly, you can always add more to that. If you do have a recommendation for denial, you can add that you think it's not appropriate. I think the grounds for that would likely end up being it's inconsistent with the DRI development order, potentially. It's not, because the Celadine PUD that implements the DRI development order for Hunter's Ridge identifies this area as single family, and the language that's in the PUD says the 5 model homes, up to 3 of them temporary sales centers. I think some of this is just us catching up with the times, that I think now we'll have a better foresight. When we did this the first time, we didn't have that foresight. You're going to start seeing us including more of these inset plans as part of our PUD site development plan that provide what this will look like in a temporary basis for these temporary sales centers. So I think you'll have few, if maybe this may be the only 2 that we'll have for a long time of this nature, because I think we'll be watching it more in the future to make sure that these become incorporated as part of the overall PUD site development plans for these going forward. With that, again, I'll close, await any questions or comments, submit my full report for the record, and certainly await your questions. And do have the applicant present for any presentation or any questions also from the board. So thank you very much.
Okay, do we have any comments or questions for staff?
I'm going to wait.
Wait.
Thanks, Adam.
Thank you.
Okay, so is the applicant here? Would you like to present, please? Please state your name and where you're from.
Good evening, Sydney Kendrick with D.R. Horton. I don't have much of a presentation. I think Adam did a great job, but I'm available for questions if you have it.
Can you speak into the microphones? You could bring it up.
Oh, sorry.
So they can hear you.
Sydney Kendrick with D.R. Horton. I don't have a presentation, but I'm available for questions if you have any.
Do we have any questions for the applicant?
I have a question of Adam, but I'll go ahead. You might join in on this. So, Adam, we did, at Hunter's Ridge, I don't know if it was this lot, but we did one of these things over there. We approved. That's not this one, or is it this one?
Yeah, no, sir. That we did this retroactively. The first one we had done was in the Huntington projects to the south, and that
Okay.
was
like
a bit,
3 years ago, 4 years ago?
That first one was a little longer, and then we did one I think around that 3-year mark in the former Huntington Green, the one to the far west end. We did one.
So if I remember correctly, didn't we have a time limit?
We talked about that, and I was hesitant to do it here because it's Gina's saying it's in the PUD. And
What's in the PUD?
The potential time limit. I don't remember it having a specific time limit on the, she's nodding yes, on the temporary sales center itself.
It's in the, Gina, it's in the PUD that there is a time limit? Is it? I can't hear you, Gina.
You said yes.
So I don't know why we don't reiterate it here. I mean, like I said, last item, we talked about people following the law that exists in state law, but I would like to know what the time limit is on that. I think that does have a factor. And I think we even talked about the last one, if that time limit becomes an issue, the applicant can always go back up and try to amend that. But, I think for the residents' sake, 50 years down the road, this is still a parking lot. That may be a different story than 5 years. So that was the first question. The second question had to do with, so there's home A and home B here. If they go and they want to leave home A, let's say the closest to the parking lot, a model, but now they want to sell B. Then no longer B isn't offered anymore as a model, so they just want to sell that. Are they incumbent on taking one out and then leaving one and still leaving that parking lot there? Or is this a parcel, one thing altogether, and they can't break it apart and keep one a model and take the other one and put it into inventory? How does that work?
Yeah, I would think there'd be a potential in just looking at this, that they could put 20 into inventory, leaving 19 out. I don't know why they would, because they are two different house types. You can see it.
Again, if they say, well, that house isn't selling very well, and we'll just put an inventory. Is your concept that this thing is acting as one unit? Do we have any limiting factor to say that they pull one out, they pull them both out, or whatever?
None that I'm aware of in the PUD, but I'll look to Gina then, since she's finding things that I don't think are there, but go ahead.
I don't know why you
I
would do
stand
that.
corrected.
No, did you say that out loud?
Did.
Hang on, everybody.
Speak into the mic.
I couldn't hear her. Yeah, speak into the mic, please, ma'am.
I stand corrected. With the section I is where you find the model homes. There's not a specific time limit.
And Mr. Chairman, if I could respond, and so, in hindsight, I think that we would, and we have had in the past historically, we've had a 5-year clock, and then we've had maybe a 2 or 3 year renewal that we've listed. It was problematic with the first one we did, because we had the applicant then come back several times, and if you remember, it was close to the downturn. Hindsight, I think also with that, is that we would write in a time limit into the PUD development agreements. We didn't do that here with this one. I was hesitant to put it in here because I wanted to keep the context of this clean to just the site development plan. So the way I rationalized it, and I certainly understand the concern, the what if, or maybe it's not the what if, the recession that we're going to go into here in the next few months that we're seeing the start of, what happens then when this develops as model homes along with a parking lot, and then we have a prolonged recession. I don't think that's happening. I do think we're going into recession. I don't think we're going into a prolonged recession as we had previously. And I don't think it will necessarily have the impacts I'm hoping that we had before. Bottom line, should there be a time limit? Probably. Does this work against a builder whose goal is to build houses and sell houses? Yeah, I mean, their goal with this in their inventory, this is money for them. So that the other way I thought about it is when they're all done, whatever level they're at, if the sales break down, it may be in their best interest to go ahead and say, hey, you know what? We're going to sell these 2 out as houses, take that parking lot out, and we're going to be good. And so that's why I came back and said, a builder doesn't want to keep a sales center going indefinitely because it doesn't help them, especially when that sales center is sitting on their product. It's on their lots. It's in their best interest to get their sales program, hopefully a very robust sales program, done and over with, and get that their inventory sold out. And so that's why I looked at it and said, maybe this isn't a big issue, but I certainly understand your comment. The what if, that may be a very real possibility, we come into a long-term recession where we have something then that maybe falls into disuse. We had that history across from the previous application where we had the sales center on the north side of 100 that sat there for a long time. That was no longer a sales center, but became very quickly an eyesore. So I understand where you're heading.
No, I would like to hear from the audience first, and then I'll give you my 2 cents on that. So, thank you.
All right, thank you. We're going to bring it to the public. Does anybody want to come up and comment on this item? Please state your name and where you're from.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Liddell. I live at 46 Huntington Place in Ormond Beach. And more than anything, I guess I have a couple of questions and concerns. When I saw the posted plaque go up for the application 3347, now I see it's 3346 at 3347. It led me down a path of, well, where was the applications for the development that these model homes and parking lot are going to be supporting? And I went back in time, I went back into data going back to 2016, and I found applications that were dated 2017 that looked to have been approved back in 2018. Is there a time limit on how long an application can sit there before they finally start developing a property? And this particular parcel backs up to my property and many others in the audience right now. And I guess I've got the concern about timing. And one of the things that I was looking for were environmental impact studies, infrastructure studies. I may have missed them, looking back at the agendas and minutes of the meetings that had taken place previously. But I'm concerned also about the wetland mitigation and ultimately the negative impact to the wildlife. Since I've lived there in Huntington Village, I've seen bobcat, bald eagles, osprey, deer, coyotes, a variety of different turtles, from snapping turtles to, I don't know if they were box turtles. I'm not a turtle expert, but there've been a lot. And I'm ultimately, I guess, concerned that in our effort to develop and provide additional single-family homes, I'm not anti-development, but in our efforts to go down that path, are we not giving enough emphasis to the wildlife and the wetland studies that need to be done? And hopefully it's not just being rubber stamped. So again, it's not really specific to this particular application and the one immediately following it, but more general in the development in the area overall. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that would like to come up and comment? No one else? All right, so seeing none, you can rebuttal.
Sure, so her comments are not really related to this application. It was in regards more so to the overall DRI and PUD. This pod and the subsequent pod are at kind of like the finish line. This final plat is coming to your city, or excuse me, your county council on the 17th. For a project to get to this point, extensive environmental work has been done. St. John's Water Management District permitting, Army Corps, those reports turned back no endangered species, no plants that have to be protected. That site is under development with infrastructure in the ground that's going to be CFC pretty soon. So it's not as if we just went out there with no type of consideration to the environment or what county requires, state requirements, or federal requirements. And again, that was a separate comment, not really in regards to the site plan approval for model homes to go in.
Thank you for your rebuttal. Do we have any questions for the applicant?
No.
Staff, for that matter, no?
So we're open to discussion now.
For discussion.
Adam, I think, again, on the time frame, we didn't have one in there, and so if we don't have a time frame, one of my concerns is, again, that 20 years down the road, this has still got a parking lot in there. And I agree with you. The common sense says that's not going to happen, but we don't always operate on that. D.R. Horton probably would push this thing through. They seem to be able to push developments through, but D.R. Horton could sell this project next week to somebody else. Somebody else could take it over. And I don't see the issue with at least having a time frame that can be amended. So we say it can be amended, based on the circumstances. And, and we're just a recommending body on this, Adam. We're just a recommending body. So if there was a time frame that, that we were to recommend in a motion, if others agree with me, that still goes to the county commission. They still have, you have a chance and they have a chance to basically work out how that would affect them. I mean, I see her coming to the microphone now, so.
My comment is when you say in the timing aspect of it, is
The timing meaning how long that could remain a sales center.
Right, so because currently the language, correct me if I'm wrong, it says once sales are complete, we are to turn it over. So you're asking for something specific that spells out.
Correct. So I think that if the sales are continuing on like year 35 from now, and if you got 3 more houses out there, you haven't sold 3 houses.
Yeah.
Again, not that D.R. Horton necessarily would operate that way. I've seen the way
Right.
you guys do your developments and you guys push them through.
Yeah.
But you could easily sell that development to somebody else down the road. It's way
I can't really speak to that. But
Right,
yeah.
that'd be something way above your pay grade, and someone
Exactly.
decides, okay, we're gonna divest from Florida, we're gonna concentrate on Arizona, and
Mm-hmm.
sell our projects in Florida, and there's Adam's downturn in the market, and they just sell them all, and somebody else comes in, and that thing sits there for a long time. They should probably, for the protection of the neighbors, so it doesn't turn into, as we saw, an eyesore or a protection, it be reviewed and not just be able to perpetually sit there. That's my only concern.
The final plat that's going to your county council on April 17th also includes HOA documents for maintenance. So the lots can't be an eyesore per the HOA, if that's, a part of your concern. But how you guys want to handle your timing language, I can't tell you what to do, but that's kind of tough there.
Yeah, I see you had a sidebar over there with council.
In our sidebar, I was thinking there may not be any harm or foul, at least at this point, with you adding, you are a recommending body. You could say, hey, gosh, I really, really would like to have a 5-year, 10-year, 8-year, with 2-year optional renewal periods or whatever prior to having an amendment have to come back. I think you could do that. I think our sidebar is that, not to speak for Mr. Moylan, we would be in a better position if we had some explanation, some time frame already in the PUD on these, and we don't have that. And so absent that, I think we're effectively renegotiating the rezoning at this point. I don't think
But we're changing the PUD, so to change the PUD.
changing the PUD site plan.
Right.
And so I think on the face of it, if you as part of your action, you say it would be for approval, you would approve it, but then with the added condition, subject to continued discussion with staff and I guess forwarding it to the board ultimately, should it be something that can legally be done, some time frame that you'd recommend.
Unless, do you have any comments on this?
Well, yeah, I agree with that notion. I was going to add to it. I think, I don't know what the time horizon is. 5 years would seem to be more than adequate to sell off a development of this size. But I'm also concerned about the pavement on 18, and I would like to see restrictions in the recommendation that would include that has to be returned to a natural state, that is the asphalt removed before closing on 19 and 20.
Both of them. Yeah, either of them.
But I think a time horizon recommendation along with how do we get that asphalt off the ground and guarantee that it's going to happen. I think if we hold up the closings on those other two houses, that's a way to leverage that.
Then maybe I'll ask you, Mr. Connor, or maybe Mr. Moylan, in the same thing. If a motion is made to bring this up to the board, but if legally feasible, to put in a time frame that can be negotiated between now and then, would that be a better motion than us right now arbitrarily picking a time and trying to make that? I mean, it seems to me that it's something something you probably should look at. And I also think, as you were saying, that should be one parcel, and if it's changed, then it's all changed, and that parcel be either developed as their home site and all that stuff be removed, or be put back to its natural state, and something to keep erosion from happening be done to it. Again, I'm not looking at D.R. Horton. I mean, D.R. Horton probably will do the right thing no matter how you look. They're too big of a company to sit there and mess around. But like I said, they move out to Arizona, and Sam Fly-by-Night takes it over, and now we've got neighbors who say, well, how did you guys let this happen? Why didn't you put something in there? That would have made sense. You just hope that the developer would do the right thing. Maybe isn't, to everyone's best interest. So would it be a recommendation that you develop something and bring to them than us rather trying to give you something right now? As
So
far
like
as the time frame?
approval with time frame based on the commissioners' meeting kind of a thing, instead of us picking the time frame?
Yes, I would say that's perfectly fine, that your recommendation is that this should be approved, however, that the approval should be subject to a time frame set by the Board of County Commissioners, and that the asphalt surface should be removed prior to the closing of the sale of lots 19 and 20. And the asphalt is on a lot itself, right? That will be residential one day, so they're not going to want to leave
Yeah,
it
it
there.
states in there that as soon as all of the sales are closed, that comes up and that becomes a single-family lot.
Yeah, upon both of them, it should be removed upon, if either of them get sold,
If one sells and the other doesn't, where's everybody who's going to go and tour the other one going to park?
Well, that's
Why
my
would we
point.
take away the parking lot?
Chairman, if I could add quickly. So the other hesitation I had, and y'all can see it on this one, there's more than just removal of asphalt on Lot 18. There's also the addition of a driveway to 19 and 20. There's the conversion of the garage. So those are the things that are needed. I didn't want to go through and create a laundry list. And again, from the developer standpoint, their business is building lots. They're going to want to get out of this as quick as they can, and then when they get done getting out of it, the getting out of it would require us to have those modifications in order to have it CO'd as a single-family home. And so those things, I maybe have said it before, like Prego, it's already in there. It's something that, if they went away, suppose it could be problematic. We'd have no driveway for 19 and 20. They could not be used for single-family purposes without those, the easy thing, the driveway, the conversion of the garage and the sales portions. They would sit derelict, I guess, abandoned, whatever the case may be. The list would be longer than just restoring the asphalt, taking out the asphalt. The other part I think that's missing here with this and the next one is that there is some finished lot activity that's going to happen here. So one of the things we have, and y'all know about it also, I'm preaching to the choir here. Part of our requirements, our land development code and our construction plans for these lots is that you'll have some initial grading going on. You won't have finished grades established on each of these, but you will have predominant clearing that will happen on these. And so when that happens, they're typically seeded. So I guess where I'm heading is that I'm of the opinion that if you're requiring the removal of the asphalt, by default, our other processes would require that either, and certainly under water management district rules, we don't have to specify that they're going to have to sod or seed it. That will have to happen by default. It's a violation to not do that, so that if the parking lot can stay there just as long. I think your time frame, you're in great shape. But any language that you want to go into as far as conversion, I think I'd be hesitant on, because the conversion are the things that must happen to restore these to the status as a residential lot available for development as
But when they try to get a
residential
CO,
purposes.
they're going to need that, you're saying?
They have to.
And just as a side note, there's a house in the K section of Palm Coast that has no front door.
I believe it.
Yeah, so you go up to that house, there is no way to get into the house. You have to go around the back to get in the house. That's what so it's just, who would do that, right?
Right.
But they did it. So they now have an ordinance that you have to have a front door. Because, the obvious sometimes needs to be stated.
Yes, sir. Understood.
How do you feel, what do you feel that that part will be taken care of on its own?
Yeah, I think this is probably an academic discussion. I think D.R. Horton is in the business of building homes and selling them. I think when they get down to these last 3 lots, they're going to have so many sold that they're not going to be, we're not going to have to worry about them pulling up asphalt and putting driveways in place, because they're going to be doing that tomorrow. But then on the other hand, most of us lived through 2008, and I remember these things being abandoned and the banks picking them up and selling off the easy, low-hanging fruit and leaving the eyesores for everybody else to deal with later. So I think that we need to put something in here that protects us from that.
Mr. Chairman, don't read my, and planning board members, don't read my comment the wrong way. I would just be hesitant I don't want to see you create a list that would not be inclusive. I don't want to have you saying, remove the asphalt and restore it when
But
there's,
how
when
about
you have to
this?
put in driveways, you have to restore a garage, you have to, these things are single-family lots. And so my degree of encouragement would be return them to single-family lot status. Otherwise, they cannot be sold and occupied as single-family dwellings. Something to that effect.
So if I can, Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion. Motion to approve with staff comments, in addition that staff develop a time limit for the sales center to go on that would possibly have extensions. And that the lots be, as you said, be returned back to a normal lot condition that is suitable for CO, and that when they are no longer used as a sales center.
So we have a motion. Do we have a second motion? I'll entertain it.
I second.
Yeah, we have a motion and a second. Discussion? So let's take the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye to approving application 3346 with conditions as stated. Aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. The application is approved. Next item on the agenda is number 8, quasi-judicial requiring disclosure of ex parte communication. Application 3347, site development plan review in a PUD, plan unit development. Again, Adam?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this similar application, 3347, this is within the Iris development. And so now being intended to be platted as Gardenside, also of D.R. Horton. And so the vicinity here on this graphic is here. This is a pond area. You'll see it. Mixed use low for the future land use consistent with the DRI development order. Plan unit development also consistent with the DRI. And then flood zone, not a special flood hazard area, zone X. Again, some intermittent wetlands that you're seeing north of that pond, and those would need to be protected. Soils map, larger wetland areas depicted on that presumed national wetland inventory. And certainly those have been addressed as part of the DRI development order and the overall development. So I've delineated that here. You can see some parcel lines. And then the speaker to the previous, I don't want to call it your home, but she's down in this area. I did correspond with her via email. This is, I believe it's Alder, is this adjoining parcel. This is all part of this parent parcel. Alder is a commercial mixed-use parcel, so there's some concern with the speaker. I think we'll probably just try to get together and talk about some things that you may not know about yet. And so there's certainly, we've definitely, safe to say, and I don't want to disparage anybody's ability to track down things, due diligence before your purchase. The speaker's concerns were well on point, and we've had these arise recently as others have come in and purchased within this particularly within Hunter's Ridge, but in other developments where, as you all know, we do this all the time. This has a 30-year history now. So it's one of our oldest development orders. It had been through now its third developer. I think we're on our third master developer. It's fairly well master planned out. It has our applicant had stolen my thunder. She probably should consider my job whenever she doesn't want to do her job anymore. But the point there being is that there are entitlements, and there are areas, safe to say there are areas designated as clusters, maybe appropriately named, but clusters within the development, within a DRI that are designated for certain uses, and those have been master planned. And along with that, then, those precursor steps that took us to this were those wetland studies, those bugs and bunny studies that we go through to get to this point, and certainly a lot of that has already been established with this. Iris being one of those developments, it's under preliminary plat. This particular sales center site being prospective lots 22 and 23, not yet platted. Similar language within this PUD development agreement as we had with the Celadine development agreement. So Iris has up to 5 model homes, up to 3 of those model homes can be used for temporary sales centers. In this case, it's a single lot being developed with the model home, then the lot adjacent to it being developed with the parking. And then the expectation, the restoration of those that would occur then after their use as a temporary sales center. The area on the preliminary plat, on the PUD site development plan, I've identified this is where lots 22 and 23 are proposed to go. And so this step is needed because we didn't have that planning, in effect, that site plan to be able to have a residential lot used for any other purpose other than residential lot purposes. So to put that parking lot on, you've got to go through this PUD site development plan step that we have. And again, temporary in its use. You can see here, that closest entrance, it makes sense to have this sales center there because visually somebody comes right in, they're going to be heading right in, see that sales center, they're not going to be driving through that entire development to get to the sales center at the back. Those improvements shown on this site plan depiction here, what the surveyor's done is shown that proposed home that would be on here, the model home along with the parking, and then what that would look like then when it's landscaped and dressed out for its temporary sales center use. With that, I'll close, and certainly you have the same three options and expect your discussion or your motion to be similar to the previous item. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Wait, any questions or comments from you?
Thank you, Adam. Do we have any questions for staff before we go to the applicant? Applicant, would you like to come up and discuss it a little more?
You guys have questions for me?
Have any questions? No. Seems that we don't. Thank you. Discussion over here. Public comment, please. Anybody want to step up to the mic and
My name is Will Rourke. I live in Huntington Village, and I'm within 300 feet of this new project. Now, you're putting more homes out here, and no one is talking about doing anything with Airport Road. Now, Airport Road is both a Flagner and a Volusia problem, because Flagner goes through right the middle of Airport Road, and in the other end of it's Volusia, and it starts out Volusia. It's a two-lane road, and you've already got the Horton thing on the roundabout on the other side. We don't know how many homes are going to be there. How many homes are going to be in this one?
sir, just keep your questions to the board. And
Okay,
Adam will-
how many homes are going to be on this plot?
When you're done, Adam will answer your questions.
Do you know how many homes are going to be on this
That's a
plot?
question that we're going to have
Oh.
to add staff.
Yeah, continue your comments to the board. We'll answer your
Oh,
question.
okay,
You're-
yeah.
You're in board,
Yeah.
public comment.
Yeah, okay. My comment is, how many homes are going to be built here? Is there any thing to make Airport Road bigger where we can get in and out? That's, I mean, she talked about the wildlife and everything else. And when I looked at the schematic, I noticed that 130 was the one that makes the rest of these two things go. But 130 bleeds over to both sides of Airport Road. And that's why that's why I got this message, is because 130 touches me. That doesn't. But I'd like to know what's going to happen to Airport Road. Is it going to stay two-lane? That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else that cares to come up and comment? Going once, going twice? No one else? Okay, okay, ma'am, just come up to, just say your name, please.
I'm Barbara Rourke, and I live in Huntington Village.
Ma'am, I'm sorry, if you could pull the microphone
With
down.
all the development that's going on in our area, on Airport Road, like my husband discussed, what's going to happen with the schools, the fire department, all this kind of things? You're putting all these communities in. I know that's progress, but how are you looking after the residents? I don't see where that's happening, and I think that's where you should start putting your attention. I know there's going to be a lot of money coming in to Flagner, Volusia, wherever, because of all this vacant ground. But you better put some sight on the people that live here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else for public comment? Okay, seeing none, we'll bring it back to the board for discussion.
Well, Adam, I'm sure, is going to give us a total number of units. And maybe I'll and Adam, you can correct me if I'm wrong with any of it. I think we have dual traffic impact fees for those lots, is that correct?
We do. and-
So the impact fees, just to answer some of your questions, sir, so every single lot that's sold to be developed by a home, so when somebody goes to build a home on there, so when it actually create an effect that you're worried about, there's going to be fees paid to both Flagler County and to Volusia County to improve the road, widen it, put stoplights out there and sidewalks. That's in the planning. There are some other road improvements that I know we heard about in the past that they're going to do. So as these developments happen, they do that. Same thing for the schools. They actually plan out how many schools you need, and these developments help fund that. So it's not coming all out of your taxpayer money. New developments are partially funded by the increase in development by having an impact fee. So the new people that move into the area pay an extra fee when they buy their home that helps offset the very concerns you have. So there's money in a pot that they can do those things. Although tonight, we're not actually here to talk about this development because this development there's a PUD, there's already been approved. So we're actually not here to talk about that, but just so you'd have some information, we're actually here to talk about when they go to sell it, can they have this parking lot and a home there? It is in our place tonight. If you're 100% right and they weren't doing anything, that ship has sailed, but they are going to do something about it. So, Adam, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
I probably should. So and again, we've had these difficult discussions in the recent past, and it's not a moment I can really add levity to because, and I'm thinking of the one that probably the instant one I can think of that comes most to mind is the discussion we had when the storage operation that's locating on Airport Road came in, and some recent homeowners had come in and said, I had no idea this was next to me. And part of this, I think, and I don't want to brush off the idea, and I definitely don't mean it as a slight to anyone here. We do this on a daily basis. We have a level of expertise, a level of knowledge that kind of the ordinary person doesn't have. In each of the title opinions, when somebody, title reviews that when somebody buys a piece of property, there should be a list of documents. Sometimes it's listed as exceptions, reservations. It's things you should look at, and too often I think people who are buying homes maybe don't pay attention to every bit that's there. It's a lot of gobbledygook. It's easements and things that you really don't care about. But important here is reference in these if there was title work done, and I hope it was, but to the documents known as a development order, a DRI development order. And those documents in this situation, because of this being a development of regional impact, a large development, the unfortunate news I have for the folks in the gallery and maybe those at home or those that will watch this later from this area is that there is much more development to yet come. I can't give you an exact number. I would say it's somewhere, I'm going to be wrong, and I don't want to be wrong, but my inaccuracy, I guess I'll say between 1,200 and 1,800 units yet to be developed north of Airport Road, safe to say. This development is certainly not close to build out. These two developments are those first two plats that are occurring north of Airport Road. Airport Road, to answer one of the questions, is master planned to be a 4-lane road. When questions have come up before of who's going to pay for that, I believe, and my opinion is that will actually be, this is the language nobody wants to hear from me, it'll be the homeowners. Because there's a CDD that's in place for part of it, there's an HOA that's in place for the other part of it. These are private roads. There may be some potential for future impact fee credits that are out there, but effectively when you buy into a development here like this, you're buying into the conditions holistically, and part of those conditions end up being that you're buying into the assessments that will come, yet to come. And those are, as part of this development, there's infrastructure that will yet be provided. There's individual subdivisions will have their own HOAs. I don't want to make it sound like somebody's paying for somebody else's subdivision signs and the common area maintenance and things like that, but stormwater system being something that's held in common. That's something that's through the master HOA that's being paid for through assessments through the master HOA. Potentially smaller community development districts, CDDs, that may yet come that will handle infrastructure. That one's been proposed for the former Celadine property, and so that'll be heard very soon. But that's part of what it was part of the prior approval, part of the consideration for the county in its initial consideration of the development of regional impact. And so not to, by any means, belittle any of the comments that have been made. I think it's something that I'd be happy to talk with y'all outside of this session and be able to hopefully give y'all some information and help y'all become more informed. But there's much more left to come, these two being those first two. And certainly that the master plan in some degree showing the expectation of what's yet to come. But even with that little bit that I'm mentioning, and I probably need to put this on the record too, the title work, anything that was done, that development order that was referenced, that's actually probably been changed 2 or 3 times since any purchase has happened, because we've had an amendment to the development order, not a particularly material amendment for any of these residential developments, but we had an amendment as recent as this year. And so we've had some part of this that has been amended. The notification, final comment that we do for this, and I'm certainly happy it had gotten some attention. We are required to do 300-foot notification within a parcel within a project. And so that's the reason why if you had a letter that you had received, you're within 300 feet. Otherwise, you hopefully had seen a sign. That's what we're here for, is to inform the public. And so I by no means, I hope my comments are hitting the correct way. There are no incorrect questions. There are no incorrect comments. We'll be happy to talk with you and help you all kind of learn what's yet to come. And hopefully I've addressed everything that everyone's been looking for, and hopefully I addressed your comments too.
You, Adam, we'll bring it back to the board for additional comments. Do you have any comments? Do you have any?
Just one short additional comment. In two, there are the competing interests that are at play here. One of the things that we heard when we were considering that commercial structure was the fear that Airport Road would be widened and that more traffic would go down it and the school children would be in danger walking up and down the street. Crossings would become more difficult and all those things. So there are safety issues involved too. There's trade-offs to all of this. As we build in the convenience of the 4-lane road, we also need to build in safety concerns to protect the school children and other pedestrians that might be using that roadway along with the traffic. All of this is being worked out. This isn't happening in a vacuum. And I would, for my part, would encourage you to stay involved and get your education level up and understand exactly how this is being developed, because I think Adam's point's well taken. This is the beginning, not the end. There's more to come.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I agree with the comments. Like I was saying, our mission tonight was to look at this application, and on the face of it, it has the exact same characteristics as the one before. So I'm going to basically make a motion as before that we approve with conditions of staff, and that staff try to work in a time element that has extensions, and that the lots be converted back to a CO compatible lot when they are completed.
We have a second?
Second.
Right, so we have a motion and a second with conditions on the time frame as the previous. All those in favor to approve 3347 site development plan review with the conditions? say aye. Signify by saying
Aye.
Aye. And all those opposed signify by saying nay. The ayes have it. Application number 3347 has been approved. Any additional staff comments?
No,
or
sir.
Board member comments? All right, so I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.